Okay, so we have an awesome day 2 planned for you guys. And the section that we're starting with today is Urban Forestry Best Management Practices. So not quite as in-depth as the Indiana Arborists Association, but getting into some more technical topics that urban foresters need to know. So we're starting off talking about our new tree species selection guide. So Mads is here, Madeline Gullion, who worked with us for a year in the CUF team, and she basically made this almost entirely by herself with comments from other people. She did so much research, and so even though she works for the city of Indy and we're very happy for her in her new role, she was gracious enough to come and talk about kind of the behind the scenes of the guide, the logic behind some of the decisions that were made, and how we can use the guide. And so an intro for Mads, as I said, she was the urban forestry specialist for DNR CUF. Currently, she's a community engagement manager for the Office of Sustainability within the city of Indianapolis. And while she's no longer in the urban forestry world professionally, she's still a certified arborist and a passionate tree advocate. In her spare time, Mads likes to read, sew, and volunteer with Canopy Bloomington. So please help me welcome Mads.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Go up.
Go up. Okay, can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, like Rachel said, I no longer work for the DNR, but I was so involved with this project, she asked me to talk about it today, and I'm happy to do so. Okay, so just to go through the agenda, I'm going to talk about history, so what has existed in the past as a resource, the purpose of making this guide, why we included and excluded some species. Can I take this off the stand? Okay, that's better. Then break down some of the categories from the species list, talk about right tree, right place, run you through how to use this guide, and then Rachel's gonna go through some scenarios so you can practice using it. Everybody should have a paper copy on their table, and there's also a QR code that you can scan to see it on your phone. Okay, so when I came into the CUF office, this is what existed. It was a Word document with a list of native species. It is inclusive, but it doesn't have much additional information. So it serves the purpose of here's what you can plant if you have a CUF grant, but it doesn't give you much additional information to help you make decisions. Before that, there was this, the Indiana Community Tree Selection Guide, which was made with city foresters. And I love this guide. I love the artwork of it. I think it's really fun. But it's a little overwhelming, I think, with all the categories. And it also kind of aged out because it has some species that are no longer recommended. So it had to be updated for that purpose. And it had non-native species. This is from the Morton Arboretum. It's for Northern Illinois. So it's a good reference point, but it's not specific to Indiana. But this is kind of what you tend to find in species guides. It has just an overwhelming number of categories, and it's a lot of information to take in, and it can be kind of confusing. So I wanted to make something that was simpler for Indiana, just a little bit easier to navigate. Okay, so the purpose of the guide. This is kind of, I was creating a resource that I needed. I haven't been an arborist for that long, but this is the kind of thing that I would have liked to have as a project manager who was planting trees and didn't know very much. It's a good starting point. So again, we need to fill that role of having an approved species list for the CUF grants program. To provide a resource for grantees and decision makers who, overwhelming majority, I feel like, don't have prior experience planting trees, especially right now with all the new money that's in urban forestry. It's passionate volunteers who maybe haven't done it before, and in places that don't have dedicated city foresters. to provide a complete list of native tree species, to be user-friendly again for all levels, and to support all kinds of tree planters. And maybe most importantly, to promote species diversity for a healthy urban forest. So this serves a lot of purposes. And we wanted to make sure this was a complete list, not just like, here's what is usually planted, or here's what's really easy to find in nurseries, because some lists will like self-select based on what's easy to find. And what's been discovered in practice in other states, like Illinois, is that putting less popular species in guides and lists like this can drive demand at nurseries, and so make those species more popular. So just to talk about why we included some and excluded others. It's natives only, that's what the DNR recommends, that's what CUF stands by. It can just get a little dicey recommending non-native species. You never want to get into a position of like the next Bradford pear, I guess, because you never know what a non-native is going to do. Ash, elm, and maple are not included. Emerald ash borer, Dutch elm disease, but then maple just because of how it's overplanted in the state. I forget the exact percentage, but it's something like 30% of the urban forest in Indiana is in the Acer genus, which is more than we would like, so we want to make sure we're diversifying and not just lining our streets with red and sugar maples. Yeah, and then I'll talk a little about cultivars and varieties on the next slide, but really we're just trying to prioritize diversity, resilience, and pollinators. Okay, this is a lot of text, but basically a variety is a naturally occurring variation within a species. So it has a distinctive trait that sets it apart. You have honey locust, but also thorny honey locust, and that's like a naturally occurring variety. They're not genetically identical, and the offspring carry the characteristics of the parent plant. And it doesn't require humans to do anything to get that. And a cultivar is a cultivated variety that does require that human intervention. And there's some information about like how it might be stylized in the guide. It also might have a trademark name, but the vast majority of cultivars are clones, so the trees are genetically identical, and that lack of genetic diversity can create a population that's not resilient to disease. So those are just things to keep in mind as you're choosing what to plant. Okay, so in the species guide, and you can open it and look at this as we go along, if that's helpful for you. So first of all, size. How much space do they need above and below the ground? How much room do you have? Keep in mind potential size, like how big the tree could get. It'll be different in urban areas than the maximum height that species could reach in a traditional forest, but you should be prepared for that possibility. Growth rate, do you need trees fast? I mean, think about succession, think about trees that will grow at different paces. Slower growing trees tend to grow stronger wood that has better defense mechanisms against pests and diseases, but you might want, like some shade trees to line a street faster than maybe oaks could do it. Evergreen and deciduous, just do you want year-round privacy? Are you looking for wind protection or shade or seasonal interest? And then form. Size isn't just height, it's also spread. A 30-foot tree that grows straight up has different interactions with the environment around it than one that spreads out. And then planting locations is a mix of factors. So we're looking at things like how much litter does it drop? Is it really messy? Does it have a tolerance for salt, compaction, pollution? Is it messy in the way that it grows, or is there a safety concern, like something that has a lot of thorns? So that'll influence where you can put what trees. And then preferences, they're not requirements. The science in a lot of the resources you'll look at is based on traditional forest settings and not urban settings. So very different from an individual tree in an urban setting. So think about those with a grain of salt. A lot of urban trees are gonna get enough sun. I mean, standing alone compared to what they would get in a forest. Okay, right tree, right place. This is a lot to think about. Even for people with tons of planting experience, there's so many things that go into making these decisions. And rightfully so, you're making an investment. You're making a dedication to either you or someone else to care for that in one place for a really long time. So I think going through this framework also helps people learn not to take the decision lightly. So right tree, right place, and then a third category, right purpose. So environmental requirements. How much sun and space does the tree need? And what kind of soil drainage does it prefer? And then does your place match that? How big is the site? How does the soil drain? Is there often standing water after it rains? Are there other trees of this species in the area? Like, is it proven to do okay? What infrastructure, buildings, roads, sidewalks, the built environment is nearby? Have you called 811? And how is the space used by the community? I think that one's really important. I've planted trees before in a big open field that looked perfect for tree planting, only to find out that we made an ultimate Frisbee team really, really mad. So, try to connect with the community and learn how they use the space, because that should inform your decision. And then right purpose. What are your goals? Why are you planting a tree? Is it for the economic benefits, aesthetics, environmental impact? What's your timeline? And then how do the neighbors feel? Again, this list isn't comprehensive. I think now that I'm not a DNR employee, I can say as an individual, it can be okay to plant non-natives. There are a lot of city foresters who will tell you they've had a lot of success with specific non-native species. But this list is limited to natives just because of what the DNR approves for grant spending. You might be limited by nursery availability. You might, go into the list and think, here are the things I want to plant, and be really set in that decision, and then contact the nursery and you can't find that, you can't source it. You might have locally recommended or prohibited species, so check with your city forester if you have one, look into your tree ordinance. Cities will have different rules, and you might find that you're not allowed to plant something. You want to consult local practitioners and experts, people who have planted trees before in the area. That's always useful. This is just a good place to start, have a list of ideas and then build off of it. And there's also regional climate differences throughout Indiana. So what does well up near Gary might not do well in Evansville. So there's some resources in the guide that can help you think through those decisions. Okay, does anybody have any questions about any of that information before we get into scenarios? Okay.
You guys are a lively bunch this morning. Okay, hold on. I'm going to switch over this real quick. Sure.
So, to put this out, what kind of pushback do you get from anybody?
Pushback?
Pushback from somebody in the community disagrees with something that you put down on paper.
Yeah, people push back against natives only, for sure. But that's really just, if you're being funded by CUF, then you have to stick to the list. But otherwise, you can plant what you want.
Okay, any other questions? All right, time to have some fun with some scenarios. And this is, a lot of people have planted a lot of trees and know about this kind of stuff. So this is for understanding potential uses of the guide. And I have pictures to show you. Okay, all right. We're gonna use our imaginations here. So, scenario 1, so you're a landowner. You own the land around this retention pond, and you want to plant trees to reduce erosion. Should trees be planted, and what trees should you plant? So if this was a workshop, I'd make you go through all this stuff. But so I'll say, considerations-wise, we notice it's a very wet area, so therefore we would want trees that like wet environments. And we also notice you might have lots of space, some protection from the wind, with the trees in the background depending on where the wind's coming from. And so we're gonna look through our guides here. So if you have it on your phone, pull it up. If you have the actual physical copy. So we want wet. Potentially we want a big tree because we want to maximize the benefits of that tree, and we have lots of space. And it's pretty much gonna be full sunlight. So, looking at our guide, what kinds of species, feel free to shout them out, what kind of species would go well for a wet site with full sun? Sycamore! Silver maple! Cottonwood! Catalpa! Hey, see, you guys are experts already, but now you see kind of this is how you use the guide, right? All right, we're gonna step it up here. Step it up. Scenario number 2. You're a park manager, and you want to provide shade around the picnic area to attract more visitors because they're mad that it's too hot and sunny in the summer. Obviously not today. So, considerations. A larger tree will provide more shade. If you notice, there's a river there. It looks like there's already potential use of the site, so there's some compaction potentially. But the big thing is, do we want a tree in 30 years or now? We want it quick. So we're gonna look for a large shade tree that grows fast. Catalpa. What else we got? Sycamore. Elm. Tulip. That's the one I was looking for. Tulips are the speedy. And then you can, layer in some slower growing oaks and, get some site diversity. Okay. Scenario 3. You represent a tree planting nonprofit, like some of the people here, and you're deciding which places along a street in your neighborhood to plant trees in. So you come across these planting strips that are 6 feet wide-ish, and the owner of the house next door says they want a tree with pretty fall colors. So the considerations for this are, and don't come for me, everyone has different opinions, okay? Space is large enough for a medium tree, potentially large, depending on what you want. And notice that it's along a street. So we want a street tree that is particularly can deal with salt and can deal with road conditions. And fall color. All right, what trees we got here? Fall color, street tree. Sweet gum, black gum. Tupelo, wait, what was it? Shingle oak. Yeah. Wait, I want to hear from KIB folks. What would you plant here? Oh, KIB's busy. You would plant a tree. That's good. Okay. All right. Okay. Scenario 4. You are on the tree board for your town, and you're deciding where to plant trees to get the most community access. You've noticed your town park gets pretty loud during high traffic hours, and the highway is also such an eyesore to people enjoying the park. Should you plant a tree, and if so, what species? So we're looking at considerations. We want a visual and sound barrier, and preferably a year-round visual barrier. Also, wind and salt tolerant, because we have that big highway right there. Okay, what is going to be a good street tree that would provide coverage year-round? Pines, red cedar, blue spruce. Who said that? Listen now, listen. We're at an urban forestry conference. Okay. Yep, so potentially evergreens. And you notice there's lots of space there, so you could plant several. Okay, one more scenario here. You're a homeowner, and you want a tree in front of your house. Should you plant a tree here? No, why not? Oh, those flags, they represent utilities. Yeah, also, is that, the homeowners, or is that the city right-of-way? Most likely the city right-of-way. So, yeah, you gotta make sure you use common sense when using this guide, and, yep. Yeah. Oh, potentially their yard that they could plant in. Yeah. Probably. Okay, those were my scenarios. So you guys feel equipped to use the guide? You kind of know what's going on? All right, awesome. So let's check the time. Oh, we're doing pretty good. So we're going to go ahead and get into our next presentation. I'm going to put this up here. Okay. Next on the agenda, you guys are real excited about that tree species selection guide. Here. Time for the next presentation. Yeah. Yes, please give Mads a round of applause. Yes. We're very grateful to her for doing that and for going over the guide. Okay, so our next presentation, it was supposed to be from Rick Barker with Bartlett tree experts about young tree maintenance, and poor Rick fell sick. So now we're gonna welcome back Kyle Daniels to Daniel, I always say Daniel, to talk about young tree maintenance. And you're gonna have to do whatever you need there. And I
have a better laser pointer if anybody needs it.
better laser pointer. And then this is, oh, give me one sec. You need a visual here. Do 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 do. Yeah. There you go.
Thank you. All right, good morning, everyone.
Hope y'all enjoyed yesterday and got quite a bit out of it. Whenever Rachel came to me, Rachel asked what we should do yesterday, I said I'll throw talk together. And I know that some of y'all are brand new to the industry and some of y'all have been in the industry as long as I've been alive. So I threw some things together to hopefully cover the whole spectrum, and everybody will hopefully be able to come out of here with learning something new. So these are kind of the 4 things that I'm going to hit. Soils, fertility, pruning, and transplant shock. I put that picture up. I hope we're not doing anything like that whenever we're out. I see it a lot, but I'm sure none of y'all in here do that. All right, so first we'll talk about soil and media and some of the different properties related to that. So in terms of the physical properties, soil texture, y'all that have been in the industry a while have seen the soil texture triangle, I'm sure. What the soil texture is that's the proportion of sand, silt, and clay in your soil. Generally speaking, most of Indiana, especially kind of north of Indy, very, very heavy clay soils. You get to some of the bottomland areas, going to be a little more sandy, and you get a little bit east of here and there's no topsoil, right, over in Brown County. So that's the soil texture, soil permeability, which we'll talk about whenever I talk about kind of water and soil and plants and how they interact. That's the ability for that water to get down into the soil. Water holding capacity, that's how much water that soil can actually hold. So if you think about clay soils, they stay really soggy. They hold a whole lot of water, whereas sandy soils are going to drain quite a bit. And so whenever we think about what type of soils we have, that really needs to guide our tree selection based on our soil texture and water holding capacity and all that. Soil structure, so porosity, that's how much air is in the soil, and bulk density is really important, especially in urban soils. Bulk density is essentially the weight of the soil. And so whenever you have really heavy clay soils, your bulk density is going to be a lot higher. In the nursery, whenever we put something like peat moss, a lot of folks, not a lot, but several folks have went to rice hull pellets, for example, as a media for their plants. And both the peat moss and the rice hull pellets are great media, but if you leave those in there for multiple years, they start to break down. You get terrible drainage, your bulk density goes way up. It's really hard for roots to penetrate that. And so that's what soil structure with porosity and bulk density is. Our chemical properties, we think about fertilizer, those types of things, cation exchange capacity. What that is, it's the ability for that soil to hold nutrients. So clay soils have really high cation exchange capacity, organic soils really high cation exchange capacity, whereas sandy soils have very low cation exchange capacity. pH, which we'll talk about here in just a little bit, and salinity. If you're managing, I'm sure they throw salt down over here. That really needs to guide our selection of what plants we're putting in any areas that get a lot of salt, because it's really easy for, especially in the winter where we have a lot of snow and ice, those salinity levels in our soil get really high. And then the other 2 things, which I'm not going to touch on too much, is soil biota and microorganisms. This is a really burgeoning field of research right now, looking at microorganisms in the soil. Has anybody seen the new show about James Garfield on Netflix, or am I the only nerdy person in here? Yeah, so like on the last episode, I just watched it the other night, talking about the microorganisms. The doctor that was treating him, he said, another doctor said, have you seen the research coming out of Europe about sepsis? And the doctor said, I'm not worried about mythological beasts because they're invisible, right? And so some of the same things with microorganisms in the soil. My work neighbor up at Purdue, she's doing a lot of work in this related to vegetable production. Lori Hoagland, she spoke at the Arbors Conference in the past. And a lot of her research, I think, could be really applicable, especially for our terribly poor urban soils and new development soils. I think we can start to take some of that work and apply it to where we're growing some of our plants. All right, so whenever we're thinking about the whole plant water cycle, the process from which the water in the soil goes from the soil to the roots up through the plant and then out is called mass flow. So that's where nutrients that are in the soil actually get up into the plant, is because they're in that soil solution. And this is a very limiting factor in urban environments, because typically we have a whole lot of compaction in our soil, and our soils tend to be either way too wet or way too dry, right? Whenever we have really terrible soils. And so that's one of the main limiting factors. And I talked about roots yesterday. I can't emphasize to you all enough how important roots are for the health and longevity of our trees. And so just kind of a graphic representation here where the soil, or the water goes from the soil up through the roots, the trunks, and then transpires out into the atmosphere. So some of the functions of soil support, of course, minerals, that's where we get most of our nutrients, water uptake. Oxygen is very important in the soil. That's why whenever we have really waterlogged soils, we get anaerobic conditions going on where there's no oxygen available there. The soil ecosystem, I mentioned the microorganisms, and we're learning more and more about how important the whole soil ecosystem is. And then another is, it filters and buffers out any pollutants that may be in the soil, or from, roads or factories or whatever the case may be. So we think about soils. Anybody know how long it takes to make an inch of soil naturally? It's about 500 years. And so it kills me every time I go by a construction site. It's much better these days than it was even, 15 or 20 years ago, when you see all this soil just being, taken off through erosion on these construction sites. And so it's really important, if you are working with any type of construction folks, to try to put vegetation strips, the coconut core logs that you see on construction sites, to try to keep as much of that soil on site as possible. So some of the factors involved here is parent material. So you might know what this is not our parent material. This was on, I asked my students Monday morning, I said, we were talking about lighting effects on trees. And I said, has anybody been to the Big Island of Hawaii? And nobody raised their hand. I said, when I was in college, I'd never been to the Big Island of Hawaii either. But that's where that is. Anybody know what our parent material for the most part here in the Midwest is? Limestone. What do we know about limestone? Very, very high pH, very alkaline, right? And so without doing any type of soil remediation on sites, typically in most of the Midwest, our pH is going to be really high, and I'll show you some examples of that here in just a little bit. Climate plays a big role. If you think about tropical rainforest, where they're getting lots and lots of rain, there's very little nutrients there because it washes them all down. The biota, the topography, I mentioned, there's not much topsoil just east of here. Because all the topsoil has run down out of the hills. I went to college down in South Central Kentucky in Bowling Green, working for a landscaper there, and the first job that I was on was just a simple, we planted a few shrubs, foundation plantings, and I was digging, and I went over to my boss and I said, do you have a pickaxe? And he said, why? I said, because I think there's some tree roots. He's like, that's our soil. So that's down Mammoth Cave type area. And so topography really plays a big role in these soil forming factors, and of course time. So just a few terms that you might hear in regards to soils and water in soils is infiltration. So that's just that water movement down throughout the soil. The infiltration rate, that's how fast it moves down through. Where's Carrie Tauscher? So we planted some boxwoods a few years ago over at Crown Hill, and we barely made maybe dug about that deep of holes, and we watered them, and I came back the next day, and she texted me that evening and said that the holes still had water in them. And so, great plant growing conditions, but they've done pretty well there. And then percolation, that's water movement within the soil there. So whenever we think about drought, back in the early 2010s, I heard a climatologist give a talk, and he said that in the Midwest, in the future, we're going to have more floods and more droughts. It's like, how in the hell do you have more floods and more droughts at the same time? That is 100% what's been happening, right? Last, 8-10 years. Early spring, and the pattern's been early spring the last several years. We get rain. I know down in this area, y'all got pounded till like June or July. But then the trend has been the faucet essentially turns off. And so the later in the year, we start to get into a drought situation. And so I know Jim Damon yesterday mentioned the drought of 2012. That's kind of become mythological because of how bad it was that year. And does anybody know what was different that year as opposed to most drought years that we have? Does anybody remember what the dew point, the humidity was that summer? It was very low. And so what was really significant about that drought is that we were essentially like a desert climate for a lot of that summer because the humidity level was so low. Generally, when we're in a drought in the Midwest, humidity tends to stay relatively high, but that year it did not. And so we had lots of evapotranspiration occurring with our plants. So a term I'd never heard until the drought of 2012 is hygroscopic water. So even whenever that soil looks to be completely dry, the clay particles, the silt particles that are in our soil still have some water around them, but they're held so tightly that the plant roots cannot take that from there. And so that's called hygroscopic water. Permanent wilting point. So everybody's had house plants. I'm sure that you went on vacation, you come back and they're almost dead. You give them some water and they perk right back up. If you'd have went just a little bit longer, it would have been past that permanent wilting point. So the permanent wilting point is the point to where that plant will not recover. And so that's a term that you'll hear. And earlier, whenever I was talking about the water movement up through the plant, I mentioned transpiration. So transpiration is the loss of water through the plant. A couple of reasons it does that. Again, that's what drives the water up through the roots into the atmosphere is that pressure. But evapotranspiration rate is the loss with the plant in the soil. And so I mentioned the 2012 drought. That was what was really significant that year is that the plants were transpiring, and then there was a lot of water being lost through the soil because the humidity levels were so low that year. And whenever you have a drought situation, these are some of the things that can happen. Reduced fertility. How do we have reduced fertility? How in the world does a drought affect that? I just mentioned it like 5 minutes ago. So that's where most of our nutrients come from, right, is in that water, that soil solution. Whenever there's not water going up into the tree, you're not getting those nutrients. And it was really interesting. We were seeing effects from that drought of 2012 on mature trees 3, 4, 5 years later because of that loss of fertility. You can get cold hardiness issues whenever you're in a drought situation. The way that works is, plants essentially have this immune system like we do. Whenever you're not, eating enough food or the right kind of food, you tend to get sick. And so that's all these secondary metabolites that a plant produces. Whenever it's under a lot of stress, those secondary metabolites that plant produces to protect itself from insects, from cold, all of those types of stressors is greatly decreased. And so that's how we get some cold injury with that. All right, so kind of on the other side of things, with a flood, saturated soils, of course, anaerobic conditions. Whenever you have these anaerobic conditions, that's a really good opportunity for a lot of diseases to start to take effect. And then this can actually increase disease and insect pressure. And there's been some studies over in Northeast Ohio by USDA. And what they went to these nurseries and they went to some of the fields that were in lower lying areas, and they compared that same tree species to areas that weren't waterlogged, and they found a huge increase in insect pressure from all that stress of being in that waterlogged soil. And so, if that plant was healthy and working properly, and you had those insects come, it wouldn't be a big deal at all. But those plants send out signals, and insects know to attack those stressed out plants. All right, so we have macronutrients and micronutrients in soil. Which one is more important? Raise your hand if macronutrients are more important. Oh, you are good. Micronutrients more important? They're equally important, right? I thought nobody was going to raise their hands. I was like, first time ever. So you hear macro and micro, and all of these nutrients are required for that plant to fulfill its whole life cycle from seed to seed. The only difference is macronutrients are needed in huge quantities and micronutrients are needed in very small quantities. Generally, nitrogen and potassium are going to be the most efficient macronutrients in our soil. I rarely see phosphorus deficiency. Up in Michigan, about 2009 or 10, I think it was, they actually put a phosphorus ban for fertilizers up there because they're trying to prevent, all that from going to the Great Lakes. And applicators, commercial folks can still get phosphorus, but it's essentially like a restricted use pesticide up there because phosphorus is generally not needed. And their ban up there was try to prevent a lot of the, do-it-yourself lawn care folks. If a little is good, a lot is great, right? But we know that's not the case. And micronutrients, this might be, it's not too bad. So what this chart is showing you, you have the macronutrients over here and the micronutrients in this table. And so this is comparing what is needed the least, which is molybdenum. And for every 1 atom of molybdenum, I try not to say it too much because it's really hard to say. You need 60 million atoms of hydrogen. You need 40 million of carbon and 30 million of oxygen. And so this is important. This is still important. It's just needed in far less quantities as opposed to those macronutrients. So a little bit about micronutrient availability. It's really easy for micronutrients to be overapplied because they are needed in such small quantities. And generally speaking, micronutrients are going to be much more susceptible to slight changes in pH. So if you go a little too high or a little too low, and I always recommend soil test before you do anything, before you put any plants in the ground. Once you do have the plants in the ground, because we do have quite a few micronutrient issues due to our pH being pretty high, I also recommend doing a tissue test along with that, because just because it's in the soil doesn't necessarily mean it's in the plant. And I'll show you an example of that in just a minute. So to pH, it is either alkaline or acidic. 7 is considered neutral. Generally speaking, most of our ornamental plants prefer 6.5, not 7. We can get into situations. Our research farm, I've seen the pH as high as 8.1, 8.2. There are some plants that just will not survive with pHs that high. Soil has a very high buffering capacity, so it makes soil really hard to change that pH because it does have such a high buffering capacity. You know, if you're growing plants in containers with soulless media, it's pretty easy to change the pH because that soulless media doesn't have very high buffering capacity. But in soils around here, it is really, really hard. And so I'll explain this in just a minute. Who has seen this before on a maple somewhere in Indiana? What do we think is going on here? Chlorosis? What is the cause of the chlorosis? Sorry? Nutrient deficiency? Which one? We're nailing it down. What? Iron. That is a great guess. So all the plants in the Ericaceae family, so that's azaleas, rhododendrons, blueberries, they definitely get iron chlorosis. Pin oak, iron chlorosis. But I'm going to show you this, and I want y'all to take a look at this chart. I apologize, that box somehow appeared. So there's 5 samples here. I couldn't fit them all crossways. So this was some soil tests that we did. And I want you to look through each of these different nutrients and pH and cation exchange capacity. Does anything stick out to you looking at this soil sample? pH. Yep. So whenever I show this to folks that, you know, haven't been in the industry very long, they'll focus on like very highs or lows, right? But y'all have done this for the most part quite a bit. So soil pH, the I guess most neutral pH is 8.1 in this. And so this situation right here is almost always, at least on the maples, is almost always manganese. There was several studies that were done that looked at chlorosis of maples and field-grown nurseries, and with those, they found there was no iron deficiency in any of them. It was always the manganese. And so what this is showing you, so I mentioned 6.5 is ideal for a lot of our ornamental plants. 7 is considered neutral. You get over here in the 8, 7.5 or 8. So the wider these bars are, the more available that nutrient is to the plant based on the soil pH. And so as you can see here, you get out to that 7.5 or 8, manganese is almost not available at all to that plant. Iron does the same thing. All right, so whenever we put down fertilizers, or the fertilizer that we choose can actually change the pH one way or the other. This is an example of ammonium nitrate here. So you have the ammonium and the nitrate. That's a very common nitrogen source that's found in a whole lot of fertilizers. And so what happens is that nitrate is taken up by the plant and the ammonium is taken up by the plant. And what is done whenever the nitrate is taken up, this hydroxide ion then goes into the soil. And then over here, that hydroxide ion goes after the ammonium is taken up. And so the ammonium here, whenever you put that down, that's going to help acidify your soil. So just kind of a simple way to think about that. Whereas the nitrate will make that pH of your soil increase. I'm going to skip that. These are just different types of fertilizers that have different acidifying potential. And so whenever you're fertilizing, you know, mature trees or, you know, even younger trees, I guess, that have kind of established themselves, this is a really good way to go about doing that with vertical mulching. You know, everybody's seen really nice lawns where they aerate and pull the plugs out. This is kind of a bigger version of that. So you're doing a couple of things. You're getting that nutrient right into the root system, but also you're relieving compaction. And so you're kind of doing a double duty there. Rachel, how long do I have? I can do whatever you need. So the protocol for pruning plants, this is my approach. You know, we talked about this yesterday with some of the nursery folks, but the first thing that you want to do is step back away from that plant. Don't walk straight up to it and just start hacking away. You want to try to think about what that plant is going to look like in 5 years, in 20 years, in 50 years, but before you make any type of cuts there. And so some of the strategies for pruning some of these smaller trees, first of all, I talked about it yesterday, look down before you look up. Correct any type of circling, girdling roots before you mess with anything up top, because that slowly will strangle that plant. You want to establish that strong structure with having a single main branch. You mentioned yesterday that oak out there is a good example of that. Eliminate any touching branches and remove dead branches. So do you prune whenever you transplant? Ideally not. Ideally when you get the plant in, you know, it's perfectly pruned. We know that's not the case, right? And so you can make those pruning cuts at that time whenever you transplant, but try to leave as much on there as you can, because the more leaves that you have on that plant, the more sugars that plant's going to produce, the quicker it's going to establish itself. We were going to do a lot of physiology, but I don't have time to do that today. So I'm going to basically focus on just two of these hormones here, auxins and gibberellins. So auxins are very, very important to think about whenever you're doing any type of pruning. If you think about a plant that's growing, you have this kind of central leader here, and that thing's going to keep going. These accessory buds are going to just hang out and stay as buds. But as soon as you cut that growing point off, you're taking those auxins out of the plant, and that then spurs on all these accessory buds to start to pop. And so every time that you make a cut on a tree, you have to think about what's going to happen back behind there. Skip through all of this to get to here. So these cytokinins here are produced actually down in the roots, and so you have this whole feedback system. So this auxin is preventing all of these accessory buds from popping, but as soon as you take off that end of that plant and the terminal end, you don't have that auxin to downregulate anymore. And so that's whenever those cytokinins start to come up, and that's what makes those buds pop. Once you get a strong leader again, then it will take over and prevent those accessory buds from taking over. Pruning conifers is quite a bit different for those of y'all who are doing any of that. So that the new growth that comes out in the spring are called candles on these evergreens. And if you whack all of this off, you're going to be in trouble. I've done that. One of my favorite stories is I was in high school. We were pruning the front of a car lot that had bald cypress in front. The owners of the car lot wanted the trees to be pruned up so that you could actually see the cars. Well, I was a high schooler. I had no direction. And me and my buddy decided they were called bald cypress. So we took out a lot of those trees. There was just a little bit of foliage left. You could see the cars great, but our boss was not very happy with us. So one of the questions that we get every single fall that come into the diagnostic lab is homeowners will say, my pine tree is dying. So if you deal with homeowners, whether it's a spruce or a fir or whatever, it's a pine tree, right? But they drop needles just like our deciduous plants do. They just hang on to them for anywhere from 3 to 5 years. All right, transplant shock, I'll go really quick. These next 2 slides just show what happens whenever you, dig a plant or transplant a plant. This is a much smaller tree up here. So say this is one that you got, from the nursery where it was dug. This is the original root system. It took off all of that growth. So it took about 3 years to completely recover to that original root growth. Whereas
a picture of late brown rot. So we can see that the cellulose was lost first, and then you can see an later advance that the lignin is finally just starting to break down. So it just kind of gives you a visual as a representation on a cell level how the breakdown and decay is occurring. White rots initially break down lignin, and some circumstances break down cellulose. There's some decays are simultaneously break down that lignin and cellulose at the same time. Other ones are just lignin only. And then wood can be weakened to the point of lost strength, causing fiber buckling. So you see a white rod I have a white oak, and it's got this big old butt. There's some white rod decay in it. I hadn't seen any horizontal ridges. So when you get to a tree and you notice that it's adding wood in different locations, it's going to probably a strong sign. You probably have some sort of decay, probably a white rot in the bowl of that tree. And then soft rots, which soft rots are interesting. They're not well researched. There's some research out there, I'm constantly learning, trying to learn more about it, but it's not as clear as white rots and brown rots in the literature. Typically decay cellulose first, but while doing that, it kind of modifies the humus cellulose and the lignin, and it creates pockets of wood that are softer than non-decayed areas. One of the most important decay organisms, is a soft rot that we'll discuss here. The location in the tree. So where this decay is located kind of plays a lot to management decisions. So to start with, we have root rots. They affect in several ways. In the urban environment, especially as we have developed areas, we were in wooded areas and now this is becoming developed. Stretched from, lack of oxygen because of compaction, excessive moisture, they change their topography. Now that woods gets more water levels, or lack of water, right? They've completely drained it with tiles and other stormwater structures. And then also a large root wounding from trenching, excavation, and cultivation. Just different ways that, these woundings that can get root rots into your large growing trees. Butt rot and basal rot, decay at the base of the tree. We should, suspect anytime we have basal rot that we might have root rots. And basal rots can also enter through wounds in the lower trunk or root collar area. So even little weed whackers damaging your trees. We also have heartwood rots. So if you think the center of the tree, that is your heartwood area, where that's mostly decaying away the deadwood or the heartwood of the tree. Rates of decay in heartwood are variable based on tree species condition and how aggressive the spread. To add to that, you got true heartwood and falsewood. You can go down, you start Googling, it's kind of interesting. So different ways to learn why trees and things are faster. But with heartwood rot, if you have heartwood rot, it might not be as bad as people think, because you think a pipe and, a pipe shrinks on the outside, the sapwood of the tree. And if we have a good amount of sapwood in there, that tree might not have such a high increased chance of failure. So there's things that you got to, when you have a heartwood rot, management-wise, it might not be like we have to cut this tree down or whatnot. So then sapwood rot, this is kind of a serious one, limited only to sapwood, especially when bark and cambium have been damaged by other agents. and little small fruit bodies is a definite indicator of sapwood rot. So if you have sapwood rot, that's usually a bad sign. Kind of moving on to fruiting structures and parts of identification. I know I get this sometimes, like someone will just take a snapshot of a mushroom on a tree and they're like, what is this? And I'm like, there's more to it than just that little mushroom on top. So, we have the top and cap of the mushroom, which is important, but, kind of why I put this slide up there, if you see something and whoever, you want to send it to, make sure you give these different levels of identification, or if you have a book to try to identify it yourself. These are things you got to look for. The context, which is kind of the interior tissues between the spore layer and the top. How is it connected to the tree? Does it have a stem? And then also the spore producing layer, which has different smooth gills, pores, and teeth, and I don't know how to pronounce that other word, so we're not going to try. But it's more of like a maze-like configuration. But so when you see something and you're trying to send it to somebody, always remember these identification parts, so then that we can try to field identify it. And a lot of times field identification only goes so far. You're going to need a laboratory analysis for that. So kind of check my time here. So kind of these are 5 different species that come out of the Cooley book of pretty much us in the Midwest and Northeast that we should know these certain fungal species. I've seen quite a few of them, or suspected quite a few of them. Does anybody know what the picture is of? And there we go. So not on here, but I thought it'd be a nice one to start with. But so the first one is a softwood rot. It's called Kretschmeria distusta. Anybody pronounce that better than I can? But it's a pathogen that has a wide host range and is one of the most important wood decay fungi in the urban trees. I suspected it in sugar maples. I think beeches tend to get it as well. It's overlooked due to its fruits being small, black stroma to the bark, so similar to what the photo we have there. It's usually restricted to the bottom 5 feet. It is a soft rot, so it kind of creates soft pockets, can lead to the whole tree failure just snapping. And with this, because it's more of a soft rot, sounding the tree is not very useful in assessing decay. And if I remember Gully's talk, actually even tomography is not really useful in assessing decay for Kretschmeria. And there's other Kretschmerias out there, but this microfungus requires diagnostic laboratory or molecular testing to ensure that this is the fungal organism that we have. So probably the most important. So you see that, I think you start seeing that. I mean, that should send off some bells. Next one here, I'm not even going to try. The fungus is a root decay pathogen, primarily of oaks, maples, and is common in our urban areas. I think Zach had a potential photo he just showed me, very similar. Of course, you only got the top of the fungi there. So tree canopy of infected trees may appear healthy, but hiding potential serious decay of the root system. So, a lot of times we're only looking up, and these mushrooms can be missed because they're seasonal or whatnot. So, looking for those indicators. Fruits on the buttress roots or from the root collar may occur on woody roots further from the tree. It is a white rot, so it's taking out cellulose. Lignin. And then sounding tools or advanced tools will not allow to determine the extent of decay in the roots. And even if you blow the roots out, you'd really have to blow them out. Visual assessment of exposed roots not very useful because it tends to decay from the bottom of the roots up. So, just kind of a serious one. Usually these decay organisms that are at the base or bowl of the tree are the most dangerous ones, right? Because it's large wood falling at high, of high heights. So, this is why these are important. The next one is Ganoderma sessile. Most common and important root killing and butt decay. It's an actual pathogen with the ability to kill bark and cambium on woody roots, the butt of the bowl of the tree, and the lower trunk. There have been reports from root-to-root spread to adjacent trees as possible, so something to keep in mind if you have other trees in the area. It can fruit on the roots and lower trunk. It's a white rot of roots, butt, and lower decay. And when you see Ganoderma, you probably see Ganoderma. I see Ganoderma quite a bit. You should probably test for decay, but also be mindful that decay is present, or root decay is likely. So I'm sure most of us out in the field have seen this either in the woods or similar Ganoderma, because there's other Ganoderma out there in the woods. But just something if you see it, it's more important, especially in the urban area, that we need to really pay attention to. I am not good. I have a speech therapist who's a wife, so my wife is, she always makes fun of me, but Armarilla, it's fairly present. Most times we see it. It's kind of the root killer of the plant, resulting in death, stress trees, that the decay pathogen resulting in tree failure. So it's really that root killer. You can see it. I remember I saw it in Fort Wayne for the first time when I was first becoming an arborist, and the black shoe-like fungi organisms that were underneath the bark. It kind of really got me into like how wood decay organisms really work. It's things you see in the field and they kind of catch your attention. So I've always kind of remembered this one particularly. Root infection centers can result in multiple trees attacked underground, and spread often occurs through rhizomes or root contact from infected trees. So there is potential of spread. That might be stress related. If we have multiple trees stress related, that this can come in and impact. And fruiting on the base of trees or near large diameter branches are roots and white rot of woody roots and butts. So one that's fairly present, I think probably a good majority of practitioners have seen it in the field. And I think this is the last one, Ganoderma appellatium. Fungus is associated with advanced decay and has a wide host range, white rot, buttress root in the trunk. This is a simultaneous one, so cellulose and lignin are being consumed together, resulting in a rapid wood strength loss. So, when you see this one near roadways or something, your little bell needs to go off to we might need to do something. Reduce the tree. Removal of the tree is always the last thing, but there's something that might need to be had. This has an ability to break barrier and reaction zones and can colonize healthy sapwood. So I missed my Y there. Then trees with healthy crowns can have extensive decay. It'd be, if you see this, we probably want to do some advanced testing, probably some tomography to ensure to see how bad this really is. And I kind of kept it a little bit short. It's kind of a little bit of sciencey stuff, but is there any questions?
Okay, so we are moving right along into our advocacy group of sessions here. And so we're very, very pleased that we have Dr. Eric North from the Arbor Day Foundation, flew in here all the way from, it's Nebraska. Minneapolis. You're in Minneapolis? Okay. Yeah, from Minneapolis to talk to us about some of the Arbor Day programs, but also how that can fit into advocacy. And so Dr. Eric North is the program manager of urban forestry at the Arbor Day Foundation and leads the Tree City USA recognition program. He's a former university professor and has served on various state and local tree boards, worked with the International Society of Arboriculture as an associate editor of their scientific journal, and served on various ISA committees. So let's give Dr. Eric North a warm welcome.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here. Thanks to Rachel, Jacob, and the Indiana Community Forestry Council for inviting me to speak. Love talking with groups and certainly open to questions as we go, and I'll have some contact information at the end. For those that aren't familiar with the Arbor Day Foundation, we're a global nonprofit. A lot of people don't realize that we work all over the world, and we have a very simple but I think important mission. It is to inspire people to plant, nurture, and celebrate trees. What a great place to work where that's the thing you get to focus on every day. And we accomplish this work in a variety of ways, but we work with corporate partners, nonprofits, state and regional forestry agencies, and of course the residents of individual communities. When we do our work, we think and feel very deeply that trees are a unifier for communities. Regardless of where you are socially, economically, or politically, really looking at trees and the benefits they can do for a community is so important. And one of the best ways to advocate for trees is to make sure that you're working with community members so that they understand the value of those trees. And these community members, some have done just amazing work, and we're proud to be able to support them in that work. And sometimes we've been able to partner with the communities that have done some really innovative projects in order to advocate for trees or just get trees in the ground. And some of those communities that we've partnered with have helped us write these implementation templates. These templates are not the work of the foundation. They are the work of other communities like the ones you come from other organizations that you might represent. And they really serve as a kind of blueprint for things that you can bring into your own communities. We've had these up for almost a year now, and we like to see it when people are applying for grants. They can download these. These are free, completely open and freely available to you. You can download these, use these as kind of an instruction guide as how you might replicate or take parts of these programs and use them in your communities. Really some great work that have been done by our partners as we do the work of the foundation. I see a couple of people scanning the QR code, so I'll let you scan that before going to the next. So in the professional world, it's really easy for us to think, a lot of people know about this, and there's always debate. I'm in conversations all over the place about, do we call it urban forestry? Do we call it community forestry? Is it urban and community forestry? Lots of different ways to refer to what we do. And I really love the term community forestry best because it reminds us that it's trees for people. It's about the community. And the more we can engage and involve the community, the more they can advocate for the work that we do, that we know is important for communities. So making sure that you're thinking about the community side is very important. The image on the screen here, this is actually from a project that I was involved with when I was working as a researcher at the University of Minnesota. Emerald ash borer had just been found, and I know that Will Drews yesterday was talking about all the different insects and pests that are coming or are here in Indiana. And so we took this crisis as an opportunity to go into communities and help them understand both their tree resources and the potential risks from this new, at the time, was new invasive pest of emerald ash borer. The way we did this was to look at communities that were too small and didn't have the budgets to hire companies, but they still were at risk from EAB. And so we trained community members to identify, inventory, and condition rate both public and private trees throughout their entire community. It was a very successful program. I think we ended up with about 14 different communities, and they ended up with not only a report of where they might sit in terms of how many ash trees that they'd have to deal with should emerald ash borer or when emerald ash borer came to their community, but it also told them how many maples they had. And I noticed on the tree selection guide, you have maples and ash. Maples are maybe overplanted in a lot of communities, and ash, of course, are at risk from the emerald ash borer. And so this gave them not only that guide, that report, it also made them see trees in their communities that they hadn't really noticed before. I remember some of the comments from volunteers saying, I had no idea that there were this many tree species. And they weren't just talking about in their community, they meant in the world. They couldn't believe, and most of these communities maybe had 10 or 15 tree species. And so getting them to see trees and see that there are lots of differences led to communities extending out this project, getting money, raising money to continue the work even after we left as the university. That's the value of working with your community and getting them engaged. This is a quote from a different project that was done at the Arbor Day Foundation, but I think it's really meaningful. When people feel connected to their community, they're more likely to care for it and to care for other residents. Trees are the best link to the landscape in a community. What's really impactful to me about this is that trees are mentioned once, and people, community, and residents are really the part of this statement that rings true. The average, like as a professional, I'm looking at the trees. Somebody that's living in their community is thinking about the people in their community. And sometimes it can be easy as a professional to lose sight that the tree is for the people. And so focusing on the community members that can help remind us of that on a regular basis, that's really impactful and for the community to make sure that they understand the value of trees. And that in part was why Tree City USA program was developed. It was to raise awareness of urban forestry throughout the entire nation at a time when it was still pretty new and people weren't really thinking about it. It also set a foundation for standards for individual communities. These standards, which I'll talk about in a little bit, are really made for communities of any size to be able to adopt, to get their community thinking about urban forestry. And we're really excited, and I'm happy to announce that the 2026 will be the 50th year of the Tree City USA program, which is great. Oh yeah, please. So for some of you, you're like, yeah, 50 years, not that long. Others, 50 years is longer than you've been around, right? So it's a pretty impactful program. This program, it's been a lot of fun to be at the foundation, to look back at some of the history and to be here now when we're celebrating the 50th, to understand the history of the program and how it has grown and developed over the years. This started in 1976 with 42 communities in just 16 states. Now we're at over 3,500 communities in all 50 states, plus communities in Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. So really exciting. These are the statistics just from last year, in 2024, of the Tree City USA program nationally. Some pretty impressive numbers here, over 3,500 communities. 49% of the nation's population lives in a Tree City USA. That's really astounding to me. 16 of those original 42 communities are set to be in the program and achieve their 50th recognition. So they've stayed in the program from day one and will still be in it. Volunteer hours, trees planted, the amount of money contributed to urban forestry, really these numbers are huge and make me think that there's a lot of hope for these communities that are developing better places and more sustainable places to live. I pulled the numbers just for Indiana so you could see where you sit in this. 65 communities in Indiana. That's great. 41% of your state's population live in a tree city. That's fantastic. Bloomington, where we are right now, been in the program the longest, 41 years. All the other numbers on here are really impressive. 25 million contributed, 19,000 trees, but let's see if it works again. Nope. Okay. Well, the next slide, I remember what I was going to say, so we're fine. The number here that's really the most impressive to me, maybe just go to the next one. Oh, did it not?
I have no idea. Okay, keep going.
The number in that slide that's really impressive for me is the fact that there are over 18,000 hours of volunteer time recorded for Indiana. Nationwide, there was over 1 million hours of volunteers, which is really saying something. Think about this for a minute, that time is the one thing we can't get back. And so when people are giving their time, they're giving a resource they can't make more of, they can't have more of. And so that's a really amazing thing.
Thanks for There we go.
Thanks. Sorry about that. So just think about that. Whenever somebody is giving their time, they can't get that time back. And so when they give their time for urban forestry initiatives, that's really saying how important that initiative is, how much they value their community. And maybe they also value the trees, but they're really speaking that they value the community. And we shouldn't forget that. That's really quite incredible. So earning Tree City USA recognition, I'm going to go through this. How many in here live or have submitted applications for Tree City USA? Oh, fantastic. So for you, I hope this is just a review. For the rest of you, or if you're interested or would like to be involved in the Tree City USA program, I'm going to go through really quickly the standards and how to apply. I'll mention that this is an annual application and it's completely free. There's no charge for Tree City USA. The program has 4 standards, and we know these are basic standards. We know these are foundational standards. They were done that way intentionally. This is not the end point, this is the beginning point. This is the foundation to build a program on top of. And these standards were designed for communities of any size. I think the smallest community here in Indiana is 150 people, and the largest being Indianapolis. The smallest in the country is 20 people, Sibley, North Dakota. Really dedicated, a few people in that community. And the largest tree city is New York City. And so these standards really are, when I say of all sizes, they really are for all sizes. So the first thing you have to have is a tree board or a department. You can have both, and I highly recommend you have both and have community involvement, but we recognize that some communities might not be big enough to have a department, and so maybe they're relying on a tree board. That's totally fine. Really what we're saying with that standard is there needs to be somebody making decisions about the trees in the community. You need a public tree care ordinance, and I'm going to go over that in more depth at the rest of the presentation. You need to do $2 per capita. Now, some communities, for really small communities, we find this is not a problem. If you have 100 people or you have 150 people, that's $300. You know, that's like not that many trees, actually, for most communities. So fairly easy. Where people sometimes have a struggle is if you're that 50 to maybe 150,000, just big enough that the amount of money you need can be maybe a little overwhelming. What I will say is we put together a guide of all the things that qualify. And part of what qualifies are volunteer hours. In 2024, the national hourly rate for volunteer hours, the equivalent, was over $33 an hour. So that's a really big boost to be able to recruit volunteers, track their hours, and report those, and then we automatically calculate that to go toward your $2 per capita. It also counts if you paid for training to come here. That counts because that's part of your investment in your community forestry through education. So lots of different things that can apply. So don't think it just has to mean that you spend all that money just on planting trees. There's lots of other ways to hit that $2 per capita. And of course, you have to celebrate Arbor Day. This seems like the easiest one, but I was chatting with somebody earlier today. Getting your mayor to sign the proclamation sometimes is the hardest thing to do. So, bug your mayor early and often to get that done. You do not have to celebrate Arbor Day on the National Arbor Day or even your state Arbor Day. Today could be Arbor Day for you if that's what works for your community. And I will tell you, I've looked at the data. People celebrate Arbor Day in every month of the year around the country. So lots of different times and places to celebrate Arbor Day. What I want to talk about now, switching from the sort of advocacy and the value of involving volunteers and community members in the work that you do, is the public tree care ordinance. So it's fairly basic, and again, done that way intentionally. You need to define somebody that's responsible for trees in your community and can make choices. You need to, in the ordinance, give some sort of direction around tree care activities. And it needs to apply at least in part to public trees so that it's really there for the community as a whole. Now, some people get nervous because they have parts of these, but they're in all different sections of their municipal code. Totally fine. I will tell you that of the 3,500 or more communities that we've had apply, I've looked at many of their ordinances, and very few communities have a single tree ordinance. Usually there are clauses that appear throughout their ordinance structure, maybe in their planning or their public works or their parks and rec department. So it's really okay wherever those pieces of code lie. Some people get a little nervous about how we're making a law and we're making an ordinance and what is that going to do and what can't I do? And I like to remind people we're making policy here for public good. The point of making these tree ordinances is so that you're protecting a resource that has a lot of value to the community. And so that's how you should approach thinking about this. Everything you want to do is, how is this ordinance going to benefit the community and the community members so that there's public good for everyone? And while you're doing that, think about the law of unintended consequences. So the photo that's behind the words here, I took this photo when I was living in Lincoln, Nebraska. This is a tree that fell after a light rain and about 5-mile-an-hour winds. No other tree on the block had fallen. This was a little leaf linden. All of them were little leaf lindens, looked about the same. None of the others fell. This one fell, and when we looked at it, we realized it was because it was poorly planted about 20 years ago, had stem-girdling roots, and so it was really just primed to fall over. I'm pretty sure, even though I don't know the planters, that their intention was not that this tree would fall on someone's car in 20 years, but they didn't think about correcting the problem of the tree before they put it in the ground. So that's what I mean by unintended consequences. I'm going to give 3 examples of real-world unintended consequences from good or well-meaning policy, just so you have some idea in thinking about how this might work. So if your first thought is there are no elephants in Indiana, I get you. I understand that. There are also no elephants in Minnesota. However, a few years ago, I got to work in Botswana, working with students and doing a research project. And Botswana is a country in southern Africa, mostly desert, and they had a really amazing conservation program, meaning there was no hunting of elephants allowed, and they have very strict laws on poaching. The elephants, being really intelligent animals, figured out that if they moved to Botswana, it was much safer. And so a lot of elephants, more so than the surrounding areas, ended up in Botswana. Now, the baobab, which is this tree in the middle here, that's actually me with a bunch of the students measuring these trees and doing condition rating in the bush for all these baobabs, which are very important trees for the culture and some economics of the area. Now, it turns out that the elephants that moved into Botswana were probably beyond the carrying capacity of the environment. And so they were picking off baobab trees anywhere they could get to them and destroying this tree that also needed to be conserved because the tree itself contained a lot of water, and so it was a valuable resource for the elephants. And so here you had a conflict, and I guarantee that when they were coming up with the rules and regulations on elephant conservation, they weren't thinking, oh, we're going to destroy the population of baobabs. But that's kind of where it ended up, at least in this section of Botswana. The next example of unintended consequences. So in this community, there were some really passionate people around pollinators, which is great, very important to protect pollinators. And so they decided to do a citywide pesticide ban for city property, and for the city itself was not allowed to use them anymore. They also had emerald ash borer, so that immediately removed a tool from the urban forester's toolkit to be able to deal with street trees and park trees. The urban forester, thinking about it, said, okay, how about we do this? We allow homeowners to get a no-cost permit. So there were some checks and balances to make sure it was actually an ash tree and that it should be saved. And then the homeowner can pay for a company to come and do an ash tree injection. A lot of homeowners chose to do that. The unfortunate consequence was there became a disparity in high-income areas, got to save their ash population. Low-income areas had ash trees completely removed, which completely destroyed their canopy area. So it made an unequal urban environment based on income. That was not the intention. The intention was to save ash trees in a way the city couldn't. And the third example here is a tree voucher program. So this is from a community that They realized that the city itself didn't have enough funds to do street trees in all of the residential areas, so they came up with a voucher program that was supported by local businesses where homeowners could apply for basically a voucher to get a tree to cover part of that cost and then plant that tree in their own boulevard area, and then the city would prune it thereafter. The problem was it was intentionally designed that only homeowners could apply, not renters and not landlords. And so that led to an inequity again, where if you were lower income, you had less canopy cover than higher income areas. That was not the intent. The intent was we'll get more trees in the ground, right? So this are just some areas to think about as you're creating good policy, to think what are the downstream effects of this? And that's why community forestry really takes all of us. This is why for tree boards, it's great to have volunteers on your tree boards, citizens, residents that are going out talking to their neighbors, talking maybe to their residential groups to figure out what are the important issues and how these things might impact them in ways you hadn't thought about as you're coming up with them. So to help with ordinances, the Arbor Day Foundation, we were really fortunate to receive funding to create a tree care ordinance assistance tool. And we're just in the final stages of finishing the technical development of it, and we're hoping that this will be done, I'm hoping it's in the next few weeks, but we'll be ready to release it in 2026. Now, the complexities of developing a nationwide ordinance tool, I don't want to go into. It was a bit traumatic to look at all the different rules and laws state by state, community by community. And so this tool takes an approach that's a little different from some of the other tools that are out there, where we give you 8 different types of ordinances or ordinance clauses that you might look at. And then if you choose to, you can take an assessment for those clauses that you might have, and we try to give you a rating. And the ratings are basic, intermediate, and advanced, or if you don't have it, then you can just get started. What we give you as a result are not only some language you might consider using, but also references to real ordinances from real communities around the country, so you can see how they've written it. Instead of giving you the exact language, which probably wouldn't fit well into your code or might violate some state laws, depending upon what state you're in, we want to just give you the idea and the framework behind it. So we're excited that this will be coming out in the next year. And it's free, again, for everybody and anybody to use. So I'm not going to read through each of these, but I just want to give you a general idea. So for instance, in the purpose statement, we'll say, well, here's a basic purpose statement. It says, this is to protect and grow the urban forestry, and we're going to talk about regulating tree planting and tree maintenance. A more advanced section might say, hey, we're going to try and improve air quality, reduce urban heat islands, right? Really getting at more the meat of why we do community forestry, and then to promote the planting of shade trees. And then a more advanced, we're really tying now specific numbers. So 40% by 2040. We're going to do a 5-year mandated reassessment every 5 years to update this, right? So really getting into the very specifics. So depending upon what your community can do, what you'd like to do, how you'd like to fit this into your within your community, we try to give you some ideas and thoughts as to where you might direct your activities, knowing that this is, again, a foundation, something you can build on and change over time. The whole purpose of this is right tree, right place. I love in the tree guide also the right purpose is fantastic. And this idea of right tree, right place, right ordinance, right place are both so that we're maximizing the benefits of our urban forests and the dollars that we're putting in. Few last thoughts as we wrap up. This is my news feed just on a given day. It's hard to get out of bed some days if I read this before I actually get out of bed. Lots of bad news out there. Wildfires, we got floods, hurricanes, whatever is happening. And it can be challenging, to say the least, to remain positive and think, it's overwhelming. It's so big. The problems are huge. But the thing that I like to think about, and when I work with communities or when I used to work with my students, What if you just did something, right? What if there's a park that you can start with? Not all the parks. What if you just start with one park, improve that? Then the next year or several years down the road, you can work on the next park. So while you might need to look at the entire problem, breaking it down into individual parts and say, what if we just get started today and do something? A lot of great positivity, and it's kind of hopeful. Once you get started, you have some hope that builds, and you have some momentum that builds. And I love this quote: "Hope is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something is worth doing no matter how it turns out." Just like the little kid in this picture, I will plant a tree, right? He doesn't know what he's doing yet. Maybe he will at some point, but it's a hopeful message of thinking, if I just plant this tree, I'm gonna hope that it lives longer than me and does a lot of good for the communities. I want to say thank you to everyone here, first for attending and being a nice, polite audience, and also for all the work that you do. We at the foundation can't do any of the work we do without communities, without states, without forestry agencies doing all of the tremendous work that you do. And I unfortunately have to leave shortly after this to catch my flight to go back home. Feel free to email me if you have any questions. I'm going to stick around for a little while, so if there are questions or you want to chat, let me know. Happy to do so. And if you have any questions about Tree City or anything that's happening at the foundation, please let me know. Thank you.
Actually, Eric, I do have a question. So I had a question about
but for anything in the ordinance tool where we give some, like, here's what you could do. Initially, there were talks like, is it a gold, a silver, a platinum, or something like that? I'm really against the rating of these things, like, this is the best thing you should do, because it has to be appropriate for your community. And when we're saying basic, intermediate, advanced, I know there's still some value in that language, but really what we're trying to do is saying, like, this is a simpler way to do it, and it's still going to be impactful for your community if you follow it and write it with good intention. And so I would say the best one is the one that serves the objectives of your community and is one that you can get done. Sometimes we start, especially when making laws, you're like, well, I mean, if you look at the Constitution of the US, for instance, they wanted to put in the Bill of Rights right away, but they knew not everybody would agree with those, so they came back later and added them in because they knew they wanted them in there, but it would be too hard to get them accepted. So just looking at your ordinances and saying, hey, if we can only get basic approved right now, but then there's growing momentum in the community, growing understanding of the value of it, then maybe you can look at, well, how do we add? Which is why everything we do is at this foundational level to build on.
Okay, thank you. I was
Yeah.
curious about that. So thanks once again. And certainly we hope you have a good flight home. Improving messaging and communications, once again from Rachel Comte. We're very grateful that she came to do not one, but 2 presentations. There's all my notes. I don't know if I made one. Here, we'll try one last time. Okay, I'll give you some Jeopardy music. Do 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 do. See, we just want start, I think. And then I did get feedback that people kind of away.
Yeah.
So
Can you use the arrow too?
yeah, you can use the arrow.
Okay.
And you can just turn that up.
All right. Thank you. Okay. Hi again, everyone. My name's Rachel Comte. As you probably heard yesterday, I am an urban planner and an arborist, but my background, my first 10 years were in marketing and communications. First in traditional, then email marketing, then online search engine marketing, before ever getting into urban forestry. So I moved to the Cincinnati, I did my undergrad here, by the way, in Bloomington. I moved to the Cincinnati area after being away for a while and became a landscape designer, then became a landscape designer at a tree company, doing tree sales and plant healthcare, and worked there for a while, became an arborist, then went to school for urban planning. So that was sort of my path through. And thanks to my first career, I'm constantly aware of and analyzing the messaging that we're using and how people react to what we're telling them about urban forestry or what we're asking them to do. So I wanted to share some of the learnings and thoughts that I have about strategies of how we can improve our communications in urban forestry. Oh, the animations work, cool. Okay, first we need to focus on the end game and remember that we're dealing with regular people. No matter whether they're city staff, community, elected officials, they're all regular people. So we do need to look at the urban forestry as a normal lay person would do. So in marketing, it's often a process of discouraging businesses to talk to potential customers or clients or whatever it happens to be about their own company, because people don't care about your business. They care about how your business can help them solve their problems or address an issue. And it's the same with trees. So you have 1 to 2 minutes to talk to a group of people, and here we are talking about trees, when what people really care about are the benefits that trees provide. So you can see the disconnect there. So that's one thing that I'll talk about further in a second. But you can look at ad campaigns that are out now. These are a little dated at this point, but if you look at Apple ad campaigns, have you ever heard them say, we make really good hardware, technology, apps, operating systems? No, they say they make your life easier. They allow you to think creatively, more fun, more efficient. We can take a page from that type of thing. If you, Simon Sinek is a leadership expert, and he talks about how leaders can inspire cooperation, trust, and change. And he has this idea of this golden circle. It's an idea to attempt to explain why some people are more particularly able to inspire others. The neuroscience behind the golden circle is that humans respond best when messages communicate with the parts of their brain that control emotions and behavior and thus decision making. So basically it boils down to this. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. So what I would say is that services or products you sell, that's the what. That's, we plant trees, we do all the logistical stuff that we do every day. So oftentimes someone might say, what do you do? Oh, I work for a nonprofit and we plant trees. That's the what and the how, but the why you do it. Why do you get up every day and do this work? Well, maybe I want to make communities better. But what if you switch that? And he said that effective leaders, most of us work from what to the why when we're talking to people. But effective leaders start with a why and move out. So when someone asks you what you do, I create great communities, healthy places for the neighbors, for the neighborhood, or whatever it happens to be for you. And the way I do that is through trees. So it's something to think about. I would say your why you do what you do is just why you get out of bed every day. And the why isn't, like, for a private company, it's a little bit different than an organization, but your why is not to make a profit. That is often the result of what you do, but not necessarily the why. And he found that the most gifted leaders lead with the why. So think about Martin Luther King's speech was, I have a dream, not I have a 5-point plan. You can see the difference in what's more motivating than others. By the way, he cites this is the best way to hire good people too, is to start with their why and move out, not the how. You can hire people who believe what you do, and you can teach them the rest. Partnering, we talked a little bit about this yesterday. I find it helpful to, when you're talking about partnering with people, organizations in your community or entities, find those who have overlapping missions. So it's easiest to put up two lists, or this is the way I do it, list of benefits that trees provide, and the other one is that golden circle again, the why, the what, and the how. And go back to who else is also interested in stormwater runoff? Who else is also interested in energy savings or heat reduction? In my imaginary perfect world, I wish we had the American Lung Association advocating for trees versus someone who's a tree person advocating for trees. You know, we get kind of the same thing, the same response of like, well, of course you're going to advocate for trees, you're an arborist, you know. But if the local public health official is advocating for trees, that has a different weight. And this can be helpful. These partners that you come up with can be helpful to share the financial burden, but also reach more people. I didn't realize this was all automated in here. Okay. The next thing I want to go back to the idea of talking about trees as an everyday person would. We're solving a problem for our audience, and we need to take advantage of the fact that trees do solve many issues. So if you've ever wondered why your campaign might not be doing so well, even though you're sure it's exactly what your target market actually needs, it might be that you're not marketing to their level. So if we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, Abraham Maslow, I think his name is Abraham, used to understand what motivates people, and his idea are that people are motivated to achieve certain needs and that some needs will take precedence over others. Our most basic need is for survival and food and shelter, and those are the lower levels on this triangle, and throughout your life you go up and down in these levels. Once your level is fulfilled, you move up to the next level, and that's about what motivates us. So we are so fortunate when we talk about the list of benefits that trees provide, that they fall in the lower rungs, which means this is beneficial and important to so many of the masses of us. So when we talk about trees, I think we need to talk about it in ways that meet our basic needs. Your water will be clean, your business will be more successful, your family will be healthier. I would say too, let's see, one second. Another thing we need to think about is using, looking at the terms that we use. Are you using terms that regular people would understand? We at this conference today and yesterday have used a lot of terms that a lot of us know because we're in the business. But as you're talking to the public, even the most basic terms like urban forests, well, it's trees within the city. Okay, I know what that is. Stormwater management, we talk about that like everyone knows what it is. And of course, the public knows what stormwater is. It's rainwater that falls. Well, why is that bad? So really what that boils down to is water pollution and flooding. We use the term mitigation. That's a very technical term. It's lessening or correcting of something. DBH, it's the size of a tree. Air quality, instead of talking about air quality, what does air quality mean really? It means less asthma for kids or whatever the thing is in your community. When we talk about impervious surfaces, let's talk about roads and buildings. Local waterways, instead of saying local waterways, let's talk about the actual name of the waterway. Like it's important to Lake Monroe. And UTC, acronyms, we all have a bazillion acronyms that we use. And I constantly have to correct myself when we're doing this. Excuse me. But it's important to keep at it. So let's take a couple example sentences. So I call it tree speak. You can see this sentence here. I would say trees instead of urban forests in Bloomington intercept, nobody uses cubic feet. They don't know what that means. So I would say millions of gallons of rainwater instead of stormwater. And also, we don't need to use exact numbers. I know a lot of scientific people in this room that might make them glitch, but people just want to say, oh, it's over 6 million gallons. When you're reading something, that's enough. Here's a giant word salad that we see frequently. I'm not even going to read it because it makes me glitch. But if you had to rewrite that, and that sentence or that couple sentences may be perfect for your audience if you're writing for academics or people who are well versed in this world. So it's not that it's a bad sentence, but for marketing purposes, that's a glaze over and move on kind of sentence. So breaking it into paragraphs, trees instead of urban forests in Bloomington. We say here enhance regional biodiversity. Well, it provides habitat for birds and other wildlife. Mitigate stormwater, intercepts polluted water. Before it runs off of local waterways, we say Lake Monroe. The stormwater management too, the air quality, we say instead of just cleans the air, they remove dust and chemicals from the air. That is much more appealing to someone than air quality benefits. And it reduces asthma and other respiratory issues for residents. And finally, it reduces heat stress. And I think that's important for people to understand. Heat stress is critically important, well, important for all of us, but critically for the very young and the elderly. The last one, again, tree canopy provides this many benefits, which we often get from iTree. It's a good number to have, but I would say Bloomington's trees provide over $11 million in services every year. So here's another one. Urban forests can add to property values. So trees in cities can increase by up to 15%, but I would also encourage you to use pictures. Sometimes you have to be careful with this because you don't want to cite a neighborhood in your community that doesn't have as much as the other, and that can get iffy. So maybe you find pictures of that nobody you know would know where it is. Another one, business districts, people will spend and shop longer. We say local business districts are more successful than those without, and people will spend more. But again, where would you rather shop? Think about it in photos, because it is an intuitive thing. I'm curious, we've heard earlier today people talk about natives. And so we use biodiversity and natives as like, we need to plant more natives. But what is the why for that? Shout out some answers, some thoughts. Why do we want natives? What? Place? Wildlife. What about wildlife? And so he said wildlife, it's more beneficial. So if you're putting food on the table, if you're working on putting food on the table and getting your kids to school, will that change your mind? What's another way of, this is just brainstorming. I don't have some perfect answer. What's that? Beneficial wildlife? You, yeah, so she said lower maintenance costs because natives will have less issues. I will say, having worked for a tree company, that when you say wildlife, I'm like, I don't want the squirrels on my roof, or that kind of thing too. So what else? Because I think that's a tough one. I mean, we can say human health, yes, let's do it. Better businesses, yeah, let's do it. But the natives and the biodiversity, what will make the case to people? Cheaper in what way? Less maintenance, yep. Yeah.
For me, it's that you'll be able to see more butterflies and moths like you used to see when you were a kid.
Yeah. Yeah. So she said you'll be able to see more butterflies and moths like you did when you were a kid. One of the things, it was a statistic from Doug Tallamy, which I love his work. You probably all know about his work, but one little story he told, it's not a story, it's basically data, but it's a story to me. Just saying that baby birds don't eat seeds. They eat caterpillars, and insects too, but I just kind of group them all in. They eat caterpillars. So when you think about one chickadee nest, just one nest for 2 to 3 weeks, they require 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars to feed that nest. And each caterpillar has a host tree, or a group of trees that it will reside in. I'm sure I'm not using the technical terms, but that is what regular people will get. So when you think about one oak can host up to 500 species of caterpillars, one ginkgo will host only up to 5. So if you talk to people about food for baby birds, you might get someone who's like, yeah, I want to do that. Anyone here is Gen X or older will remember cutting up all the plastic pop can things because you don't want the turtles to die, you know, and so we all did that. Any other ideas for the case to plant natives to a lay person who's got a lot of issues, other issues they're dealing with? Yeah. Improving soil and air quality. What does improving soil quality do? And I'm just sort of brainstorming. A chain of events. Yeah, and I think one of the things when it is a chain of events, I think we have to assume that people don't make that connection. So if we say soil quality, okay, what does that mean? That means less chemicals in the soil or less chemicals in the water or something that regular people can get behind. But did someone else say something?
Cheaper in terms of maintenance, but they're also cheaper in terms of less expensive to purchase. And then the IDNR has the program to purchase bundles.
Yeah, where he said less expensive to purchase when you can get bundles of whips from state entities. Yeah, what else?
I like to say less maintenance equals less money the city has to use of your taxpayer dollars towards a tree and to put it towards something you care about, like potholes or something that would bother you.
Right. Trade-offs, absolutely, yep.
In the same way as maintenance, it's also sales for the second point beyond economic. They're healthier, they'll thrive a little bit greater.
They'll thrive. Yeah. Yep. He said they'll thrive more with less work because they're already adapted to this environment. I will say that we try to do, in my work with communities, we try to do natives wherever possible. It's often the case in urban areas that it's not a native environment, so some of them do struggle, but yeah, absolutely. Did you have something back there? They'll establish faster? And so when we're saying natives will establish faster and be cheaper and all of this stuff, that is you could argue this, but I could say a lot of that is more how things instead of why things. Those are how we're gonna do it, why it's better as far as logistically. So I guess the why is money savings, but if you're trying to put food on the table, will that make it for you? Did you have? So we're trying to learn from our mistakes. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Any other idea? Yep. Pollinators, yeah. What? Right. Yep. Yeah, and I think there definitely is something to that no pollinators, no food kind of thing. I think we have to make a more clear case because if you cut down your oak in your backyard, there's not going to be less food at the grocery store. So, and I don't know what the answer is. I don't have all the answers here. I'm talking about concepts and things that I think we need to work on as a group. But it's challenging, yeah. You know, and while we often wish we could reach people with one message or via one avenue, as we know, life is just never that simple. So don't assume that one message will fit everyone that you want to reach. You know, take this message, trees are the answer. Like everyone in here probably is like, yeah, I'll buy into that. But if you don't know anything about trees, this probably doesn't have much weight for you. Or if your experience with trees has been really bad in the past, I would say trees are not the answer. If your experience is people coming in and planting trees and then leaving and not giving you any help, I would say trees aren't the answer. So sometimes we have to adjust our messaging. Christina Carmichael did some research in Detroit, and this is a bit dated at this point, but what she found was the biggest predictor of whether someone declined a tree as they were going door to door in Detroit was whether they had a negative experience. And one respondent said, people come in and try to do good, but only do half the job because they leave and leave us with this problem. Another thing is the avenue. So another tidbit from her work was they were putting door hangers on people's doors, but they had a team of volunteers, but they were having such a hard time getting to all the doors they wanted to get to. They started because people would want to talk to them and chat and do neighborly things. So they started putting door hangers on doors during the day when people were at work. And so citing that if not, they would get stuck and they couldn't get their work done when actually the audience needed that one-on-one conversation. And so I think this is about, I've heard before, I like this, it's working at the speed of building trust. And sometimes it is one conversation at a time, and that's often not the speed that we want to get things done, but I think it's important. And I know that's resource heavy as far as time and labor, but I do think that's something we need to spend some time doing and call it a win. Like you had mentioned, just do something, have that one conversation. With your tree planting projects, if you're doing street trees, do you do opt-in or opt-out? And how are you managing that? These are all questions that I think we need to ask and adjust every time we do something. Taking the overlapping missions thing a bit further. How much time do I have? Where's Rach? Okay. Find out what you can do to tie into the existing planning trends that are happening in your communities right now. Go beyond your projects to things that are going on now. So like complete streets, these policies are becoming more common in cities. Are you at the table as a complete street policy is getting built? Seniors aging in place. Create public spaces with older adult needs in mind. AARP says they need aging population, need benches, crosswalks, and access to water and shade. Sorry, shade was the big one that I want to put out there. Pedestrian planning. So in Charlotte, North Carolina, they said, what does walkability mean to people in Charlotte? And one was shade from trees as far as safety and more inviting spaces. And I will say in Charlotte, we're working with Charlotte, multiple times we worked with them, but they are doing they have done a comprehensive plan where they have a 10-minute neighborhood goal, and I know that's common in a lot of cities, to be able to walk, bike, transit to all of the essential services in a 10-minute trip. But what the public said when we talked to them about it, because their Canopy goal right now is 50% by 2050, because they're at 47%. But the public doesn't know what that means. The public doesn't look around and say, hey, we hit 50%. Like, nobody knows what that means. But what they do connect to is whether they can walk and it's shaded. I would say walkability, it doesn't matter how many sidewalks you have. If it's 98 degrees and 80% humidity, the people in Charlotte are saying that's not walkable. So we adjusted their comprehensive plan goal to be 10-minute neighborhoods, a 10-minute walk, bike, whatever, a tree shaded walk, bike, transit, that kind of thing. So we make sure to put trees not in the environmental section of a comprehensive plan, but in all of the relevant walkability, health, all of those things. Let's get trees into those. This strategy is a little bit different than what we've been talking about so far. Communications comes into play, not just while you're promoting your work, but hopefully working to get input and make edits and revisions to the work that you're doing. So one is, how are your listening skills? I took a workshop on this once years ago, and at the time it seemed ridiculous to me, like, really, we're gonna learn how to listen? Clearly I wasn't listening, but I learned a lot. And listening does not involve convincing someone or making suggestions. So that includes not just disagreeing with someone, but saying, oh, I agree, I have this great book to read. Listening is just, thank you for sharing that with me, or can you say more about this, or tell me more about that. And that's it. It means absorbing viewpoints without judgment. And how often are we doing that? How are your facilitation skills? This can make or break a budding relationship with a partner or members of the public. And when you have a group together, are you facilitating a dialogue, or are you forcing that into your framework of your project? I think that's something that we all need to get better at. I have a facilitation coach that I use all the time, and I do tell college students when I'm talking to graduate programs, when they say, what things should we be learning? And I say facilitation, conflict resolution, all of those kind of softer skills is really important to all of the work that we do. And it's okay to bring someone in if you know you can't facilitate. So I do facilitate a lot of meetings, but if I was going to do that in my own community, I would hire someone because I have too many opinions about my own community. So last thing, this last connection, this last strategy was make a connection and make it fun. So we are doing serious work, but we don't always have to be so serious. So, Tree Philly does all sorts of fun stuff, but for a while they were matching you with their perfect tree, like Tree Harmony. This picture's on the right. We do tree plantings where I'm a city arborist, where I live in Newport, Kentucky. And we started putting tags on every tree. It says, hi, my name is blank, and I just moved in. And on the back, it's thanks to this, thanks to all these groups that paid for this. But also, here's what I'm going to do for you over the next 10 years or 20 years. Here's what I need you to do for me. And so people get to name their trees. And sometimes the kids come out, that live nearby, that name the trees, but people are connected to those trees. So there was 3 in a row. It was Fred, Ted, and Ed. And so the people who planted the trees, plus the neighbor, were giving me emails like, Fred is doing great, but Ed's got a little bit of a problem. And, they're checking on the trees all the time. And they don't live in that neighborhood. The other thing I would say that's kind of connected to make a connection, sort of, is in Newport, when we do tree plantings, it's the local nonprofit that is organizing that, and the city is a partner. It's the garden club that organizes those. What we realized is that, our survival rate was 70%, wasn't so great. When we started having, it's opt-in, so people have to ask for a tree, and we have them pay $10 or $20 to get the tree, and the organization pays the other $180, $200, whatever the cost happens to be. But because they've paid a little bit, they have a little bit of skin in the game, our survival rate went up to about 97%. So that made a big difference too for just a small amount of buy-in. Again, more examples of. I like these keychains. We had these keychains for a while. You can't really see it there, but you can hold it up, and it's got a picture of a tree, so you can see what a tree would look like on your street just by looking through it. These are more Tree Philly signs. I love this one. I like big trunks. They just have silly stuff around, and there's no reason why we can't be doing fun things like this. Empower people to improve their own communities. Neighborhoods can get a lot done if they're given the tools and the access. So a lot of us have inventories or are working on building inventories. If you use a software like TreeKeeper or Tree Plotter or whatever the ones that are, or even ArcGIS at your own city, if you have Arc Collector, you can give people access to looking at it. When we did the Boston Master Plan, one of the things that they chose as their goal was, we want all the money going to the areas of highest need first. We want focus on addressing equity, and I can't remember what the third one was, but the last one was, we want a seat at the table where any decision is getting made for our community. And at no point did that community create a Canopy goal. That wasn't success for them. That's not what it came down to. They want a seat at the table to make decisions for their own community. So I think giving people a connection to the data they need for their own communities is important as well. And so this last thing, this is I think it's like a decade old at this point. I can't believe how the time flies. It's still fun to see, though, these in Melbourne, Australia. Has anyone seen this before? The trees were given email addresses. And it was not, it wasn't personal trees getting email addresses for fun. But the idea was that a citizen could go to this, zoom in, click on their tree, and then be able to submit a request of like, hey, there's a limb down, or this tree fell down, or this one's sick, or whatever it happens to be. But what people ended up doing was sending letters to their tree, well, emails to their tree. And so I'll just leave these up for a second, but somebody at the city started responding back who actually had a sense of humor. And this went on for an entire year. And so people were really connected to the trees that they had in front of their homes. And they said, these are just two examples, but there were a lot of really interesting emails and fun emails back. I just think, he's like, I don't know, but then I'm only a tree, from your western red cedar. So anytime, you guys know a lot of this too, but that's all I got. Any questions? No?
Lunch. And so next in our advocacy session, we're going to be talking about funding. And so I had originally sent a survey to most kind of organizations that I'm connected to that do urban forestry in some fashion, and trying to figure out where people get their funding from, what's the makeup of their funding and that sort of a thing. And so I asked Sarah Mincey and folks from the Environmental Resilience Institute at IU to kind of review those results and do an overview of kind of the federal funding, kind of what's happened in the last year. So for those that don't know, Sarah Mincey is a socio-ecological systems scientist who studies natural resource management with particular emphasis on urban forest management. At IU, she serves as faculty in the O'Neill School of Public and Environmental Affairs as the managing director for the Environmental Resilience Institute and as the director for the integrated program in the environment, and the IU Research and Teaching Preserve. And then we also have Marie Renahan, who serves as the engagement coordinator for the IU Environmental Resilience Institute. Renahan leads community engagement for several ERI projects, including the Indiana Resilience Funding Hub. She collaborates with IU Center for Rural Engagement and communicates across the state to plan, fund, and implement sustainability and resilience projects. Additionally, she helps coordinate the annual Indiana Sustainability and Resilience Conference. Wow, a fellow event planner. Hello. So let's welcome them up to talk about funding.
So this is the quicker, right, left, and then this is the better. Okay, cool. Thank you. All right. Hi again, everyone. Nice to be with you all today. So there's our pictures. There are our pictures up there, but you can see us in person. So we were prepared to do our own introductions. We're going to talk to you just a little bit today about the funding landscape for urban forest management. And the motivation for doing this was, what I said yesterday when I welcomed you. We all of a sudden at the beginning of this year felt like whiplash, right? When federal funding opportunities and actually, federal contracts all of a sudden were threatened. So of course there were terminations and cancellations of IRA funding for some of us. Some of us still have been told by program managers that our grants are under review. But it seems like a lot of us have maybe escaped if we haven't yet been terminated, which is a good thing from that grant program and that legislation. But as I said yesterday morning as well, of course, the president's budget zeroed out state and private forestry. So we know the perspective of the administration from that budget. Thankfully, our Senate and House, sort of rejected that idea, but all of that is still in flux with the budget yet to be finalized, right? So the question then comes about, knowing that a lot of our funding comes from the federal government, either from grants or through pass-through money that comes down from the feds to the state community and urban forestry offices and then down to our local efforts. The question is, where is funding coming from, right? Where do we still have funding? Where are we getting it? So we decided with Rachel to ask you all, where are you getting your funding, right? So we surveyed you, as Rachel said. The methodology here was that we established this set of questions we asked folks. It got sent out to the CUF email listserv, and the survey was open from October 1st to November 4th. So some results. 38 responses. Among those responses, we had folks distributed across the state, as you can see in the map, which was nice to see. The majority of folks who responded were municipal staff, followed by tree board members. Then we've got nonprofit representatives up there, a few community members, county government represented, and then university folks. So the first question we asked you was, what are the sources of continuous funding? So regular funding that you receive. So most folks said allocated city funds, right, from a city budget. And of course, those funds can fluctuate. I'm sure some of us are nervous right now with SB1 about what the local budgets are going to look like for urban forestry. But I also thought it was interesting to look beyond that. Most folks said city funds down to private donors. Some organizations out there who responded have regular private donors. I know that's the case for the nonprofit that I'm engaged with. We've got one private donor who says, you can always count on me, I'm your base funding, which is a really lucky position to be in. And I was surprised to have a significant chunk of folks there. Then, of course, you see some sponsorships. Some folks have regular fundraisers. And then with business, private sector, we have profit as a source of funding. Then we asked you, okay, external funding. Where are you getting your external funds? So from the past 5 years, folks were thinking about. This is a little hard to navigate, but I'll point to the two largest bars there being community foundation grants and corporate foundation grants, which I thought was really interesting. Community foundation was mentioned yesterday as a great, or maybe it was today, great source of funding. Also corporate foundations. So you've got entities out there like Lilly or Cummins or Honda or Toyota who have foundations to do good in our communities. Duke as well, right? So some of you are familiar with those kinds of grants, and you can see that a lot of us are taking advantage of these foundation grants. The next couple up there that I think are the largest, we've got federal funding. So Forest Service is the first bar, IRA funding, and then EPA, IRA or other funding. And then move over to DNR IRA pass-through and DNR CUF annual grant. Those are all in that next highest category, those four. So federal and state money, but the majority of that state money coming as pass-through federal funds, okay? So when we think about then, if you lump these into federal, state, local, I've done that here. It looks like local is really big, right? It's the biggest, it is. But a lot of that state funding is actually federal money. So kind of can stack the national and the state bars on top of one another. And you see that our local funding and our federal funding, or higher level government funding, is actually about half of where our funding is coming from, which is really important when we think about the constraints that might be coming down from those levels of funding. The top three most important sources of grant funds by scale for the past 5 years, most people said local grants were the most important. So you listed the top three sources of funding for you over the past 5 years. So not surprising based on what we just saw. I love this next question. What are barriers to obtaining external funding? So the biggest barrier, no time to apply for grants or carry out those grant projects. I am so not surprised by this. It's probably the fact that most of you are the one person or one of just very few people who are doing urban forestry work, whether you're city government or elsewhere. We tend to be in smaller staff settings, right? But then also the other couple bars there that are high, urban forestry is only part of the job among many other priorities that I have. So that again speaks to just sort of the capacity issue that we have in our organizations for urban forestry. And then this other bar, not sure what funding opportunities exist. So yay, that's why we're here today, to talk to you a little bit more about other opportunities. Unique funding sources. We asked you to tell us what are some unique sources that you are getting. So here we just kind of had some stories from folks, right? So somebody responded by saying, we annually receive about $10,000 from the local hospital for tree planting, which is really great and reminds us that health is an outcome of managing our urban forests. So maybe we could go to more organizations like hospitals or other larger, health entities that could be involved with us. Community support grants from businesses for private property plantings. So businesses, the private sector, is sometimes a good entity to partner with, especially when we share with them the research about how our businesses often do better in our treed streets and in treed communities. Community foundation grants. So some of these grants often, wouldn't necessarily speak to urban forestry or trees or community forestry, but they might be called things like creating community grants, right? So how can we, speak to how our work is actually developing community, engaging people in social networks, building social capacity? That's what some of these community foundations want to do. Sustainability offices sometimes have funding for us, right? So I know here in the city of Bloomington, Canopy Bloomington has gotten funding from the Sustainability Office because they have grants now that where they're working to create cool corridors along streets or other pathways. And so they're interested in green infrastructure supporting those goals. The United Way, this is another opportunity, kind of like community foundations, right? So these kinds of entities that don't necessarily fund tree work are funding our work because we're making the case that we're doing all of the broader, bringing all the broader benefits to our communities. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Marie now. As Rachel said, Marie runs a program at the Environmental Resilience Institute where we're helping fund cities and local communities in doing climate resilience work, and urban forestry is a part of that. So Marie is going to tell you about this work that she's doing and alternative funding for urban forestry.
Hi, everyone. It's wonderful to be here today, and it's very exciting to talk about many more creative and alternative funding options to get you guys thinking about ways you can still get your projects funded in this very uncertain federal climate. So as we've been talking about, there are a lot of general categories of funding, and I just wanted to highlight this as an overview just to get you thinking, is there a category that you haven't touched on yet? So we talked about community foundations. If you haven't reached out to your local community foundation, that could be an avenue of success. If you haven't reached out to large industry or corporations in your area, if you have a large employer that pays for hundreds of employees to be there every day, they probably also have an investment in your community and would be willing to partner with you on a project with trees. So start thinking about these general categories as I keep going, but make sure you're opening your mindset to options that you haven't applied for in the past or could start applying for now. So when I say get creative, I mean pivot a little bit from just a standard, we are the organization applying for the grant for urban forestry, and try to open your mindset. So first, try to find collaborations with local nonprofits, schools, universities, community organizations, and corporations. There can be such value not only in increasing your competitiveness for a grant, but also in just being more ready to apply for a grant if you already have these partnerships in place before the NOFO gets released. A lot of our federal grants and state grants have gone from months where they're open to weeks, if not days, for some federal grants. So having these partnerships ready to go where you have a willing party that's ready to help you out on an application and collaborate on a new idea, that is essential to be able to tackle these opportunities. And then related, set reminders to check recurring grant cycles. If you know a grant is happening roughly once every quarter, roughly once every year, it never hurts to put a little calendar reminder to make sure you're checking in and it doesn't surprise you 2 weeks before the deadline that it's open again. And then don't shy away from small grants. I know it can be a lot of effort to apply for a 1K to 5K grant, but those, if you pool a few together, you can have enough for a federal match for a larger grant. Or if you want to do a smaller community event, you can apply for some community event grant opportunities and do a tree planting event. So there are ways you can sort of wrangle those small grants and get a handful of trees in the ground and still have some community involvement. Maybe get more volunteers interested and have funding for a volunteer organization in your area. Lots of options for this. And then find interdisciplinary and cross-sector connections. So we often think about trees in the urban forestry aspect, the ecology conservation aspect, but as you guys have been talking about at this conference, health is involved, community development is involved, the economy honestly is involved. So find ways that your group can bridge those gaps into new disciplines and be more competitive for grants not necessarily in your original frame of sector. And then last thing, expand your keyword search. So similar to interdisciplinary work, if you're looking just for the word conservation, you're gonna miss a lot of great opportunities. So I have an example here for keywords. If you are looking just for forestry, canopy, conservation, that's a fantastic starting point when you're searching for grants. But I'd love it if we expand that to parks, green space, trails, anything related to green infrastructure, community development. A lot of grants are going to be under terms like community development, and even economic development can become a tree planting initiative. Then in terms of health, which is actually one of the categories that I would say is relatively protected in grant funding, both health and youth, which I'll talk about in a minute. If you can fit your scope into community and environmental health, urban heat, mental health, air quality, all of these things that we know trees are involved in and that trees can improve our overall environmental health with, they're important to also include in your grant applications. For water quality, I mean, we talk about flooding with trees all the time, but resilience, emergency preparedness, all of these things can be assisted by having a great green infrastructure healthy and in place before we have a massive flood. And then finally, youth, there's a lot of funding for school partnerships, youth volunteer groups, STEM education, youth health, outdoor learning. All of these things can be a great way to get kids involved in your program and also get trees in the ground and get them maintained. So there's a lot of great options out there if you think about ways you can make your program fit into the scope of the grant you're looking at. And then as an example, so the Boroughs Welcome Fund is one that's actually open right now. They have climate change and human health seed grants. Deadline is in January the 22nd. So when you look at this one initially, the scope feels more academic, and this is true. They do have a lot of like industry or nonprofit partnerships with academia in this grant. However, they have so many key areas of interest that apply directly to you guys. I mean, they have ecology, environment on there, urban planning, public outreach. I'm sure you guys do tons of public outreach in this room. So having your climate communication can even be funded through this grant. So if you had just looked at the title or searched only within trees and related words, you might have missed this great opportunity. So I would encourage you all to think a little bit more broadly, and then also, again, think about who you can partner with on these types of grants. So this one is only nonprofits or degree granting institutions. So if you're here from a municipality who are nonprofits in your area, who are colleges and universities that you can partner with on this grant and make a really fantastic application together. For some general references, Racheal Stenger made a fantastic funding summary doc. You have some at your table. There should be at least one for each table, but if not, this QR code is up there. I would encourage you all to also scan the code because a lot of the grants are already linked. So decrease your workload, just click the easy link and make it simple for yourself. But these are broken up mainly in those categories we talked about before, trying to just open our ideas of new funding resources you might not have looked into in the past. And then grant search resources. If you still feel stuck after seeing some of those resources or you want to keep looking, that's fantastic. There are lots out there. Candid, Instrumental, and Grantscape are 3 examples of online databases for grants. Unfortunately, those are all paid. However, Candid is a great option. They have their foundation directory accessible through over 30 libraries just in the state of Indiana. Lots of universities also have access to it. So if you can connect with your library and see if they have access, this could be a fantastic resource for you guys to find new grants. Even if that doesn't work though, they have a philanthropy news digest email newsletter, and they will list out a bunch of new grant opportunities every week or month or so. So you can still get the news about what's been opened and what could be relevant for your group. A lot of these ones, I think Instrumental and Grantscape also have weekly newsletters. So look into those, and then look into regional organizations like the Regional Opportunities Initiatives. This one is based in the Uplands region in Indiana, but they have a grant website online that lists a ton of opportunities, not limited to just the Uplands region typically. So that can be a great resource if you just check in every month or so and see what's been updated on their page. And then this is what Candid, Foundation Directory, and some other similar grant databases can look like. You can put in your subject areas, geographic focus. You can be as detailed or as broad as you like. I actually recommend starting off broad and seeing how many things are out there. So for this one, we just typed in some forestry terms, water conservation, outdoor education, and then it resulted in 36 grant makers, 124 grants, 42 example recipients from the past that you can refer to and see if your project might also be aligned or competitive with their work, and a whole lot of wonderful resources here. So I encourage you all to check that one out. And then I did just want to touch on urban forestry at ERI. So we've had a kind of ongoing work project with urban forestry at ERI through the Urban Green Infrastructure Program, which Sarah, Stephanie, Neil, a few here have been working on very diligently and doing great work throughout the state. But for some reference for how I'm involved with urban infrastructure or urban green infrastructure, I am involved in the Indiana Resilience Funding Hub, or IRF. We help rural communities apply for grant funding, find new resources, and get the technical assistance they need for new environmental and sustainability projects. So if you fit in that scope, if you're under about 50,000 in population, I'd love to chat with you. You're welcome to send me an email as well. We love to do all sorts of projects. These are some examples from the past, definitely not limited to trees and trails, but we do have some multi-use trail development. We're doing some landfill to solar field conversion, a lot of different projects going on right now. And then some examples of trail development projects at South Crawford Elementary School in Crawford County and My Path Trail in Owen County. Oops. So those are 2 that we've been working on the past few months, both to revitalize old trails and develop new trails that will improve walkability, give kids access to some natural space. And then we're trying to improve some, there's a historic log cabin that we're trying to get solar electric generators for South Crawford. So we like to do a lot of different projects at ERI, and I think this is a great example of how we can collaborate and get trees involved, get natural spaces involved in our work if you guys are interested in collaborating. And then the last thing we have is the Urban Green Governance Program, which Sarah is working on right now. So this is a new program. We're hoping to do capacity building for a multi-city cohort. So there will be trainings involved in this. talking about urban green infrastructure, how to apply for grant funding specifically for green infrastructure, proposal development, all sorts of things. So if you're interested in that, keep in tune with our website. We have an email list on there as well, and you'll get all of the updates as we keep moving forward. All right, thank you so much. If there's any questions, we'd love to answer them. That's okay.
All right, thank you. Woohoo! Okay. All right. So I have the way that we decide what topics we're going to focus on for these. Indiana Community Forestry Council has an Education and Events Committee, and so I don't just make all the decisions. I have a group of people that we brainstorm, and so right off the bat, advocacy was something that we really wanted to focus on, just because in this political climate, you have to really fight for your cause. There's a lot of actually great causes out there, and so. Not only I feel like the marketing presentation and the funding presentations are very relevant, also thinking about the scale of who we're marketing to and how, and marketing is not a good word, who we are advocating to. So that's what I'm focusing more is at the local level, at the community level, you know, how can we advocate well to our peers? And I know this pretty well, like at the state level, we can't just go into communities and say, hey, trees are important. I mean, they don't know me. They don't want me to hear from me. But if you're their neighbor and you say, hey, trees are important and here's why, you're gonna have a lot better clout with them than, you know, strangers going in. So, you know, one of the things I've been trying to focus on with tree stewards is an effective advocate is not necessarily the biggest, greatest tree expert ever. It's the people in the community who care about healthy living, who care about having cool streets, who care about having ecological diversity in our urban areas. So I'm going to kind of define what advocacy is and then talk about types of advocacy and some real-world examples in the urban kind of forestry area of how we can advocate at the local level. So advocacy includes any action that promotes an interest or cause and aims to influence decisions. An advocate speaks in favor of, recommends, supports, or defends something they care about. And so this doesn't have to look like, you know, talking to your city council. That's not the only form of advocacy. And so this picture is actually someone from the North Liberty Tree Board who did a Oh, well, you didn't tell me. Okay. You're like, all I see is the old presentation. Yeah, my apologies. This screen has been, their presentation software leaves things to be. No, it's still. Okay, so you see this, okay? Now, we're gonna present. There we go. Okay, so this person with the smiley face. This person was on the North Liberty Tree Board and did a presentation for Arbor Day about why trees are important. So, and this was towards the community. And so it doesn't have to be, you know, you going up in front of your city council and saying, hey, trees are important. It can look like a lot of different ways. So here are some of the different ways. Civic action, community organizing, service provision, and education. So civic action, I think, is more of the classic form where, you know, you're advocating towards your legislators, just anyone that's kind of like in a position of decision making. And then community organizing, it's just kind of what it sounds like. Anytime you're organizing events, anytime you're bringing people together, you are effectively advocating for that community. Service provision is providing services. So honestly, I say anyone it works for a city staff, you are advocating for your city just by working. I know you're getting paid and that's why you're doing it, but you are providing a service and contributing to make a community better, and that is advocacy. And then also education. Anytime you have special expertise that you can share with your community to make your community better, you are effectively advocating. So what does this look like in pictures in the urban forestry world, right? So if you're on a tree board, this civic action, which that is an old picture. Carrie must recognize it. But anyways, so if you're serving on a tree board, that's civic action right there. This is one of my favorite pictures ever. I'm gonna use the upgraded. He's sitting down, watering the tree. And I just think, he's like, you know what? My mobility isn't great, but I'm still gonna stand up for my community. I'm gonna stand up for the tree. Well, I'm gonna sit down for the trees in my community, and I'm gonna water them. And I think that was West Lafayette Tree Friends, I believe. Tree Lafayette, my bad. And then community organizing. And yeah, this is little baby Aaron, I'm pretty sure, from Goshen. I think for an Arbor Day event. So yeah, this is what it can look like, and it truly is a beautiful thing. So if you want to get started in your community, there's some questions that you should ask before you decide how you want to advocate in your community. Okay, and so this can look at the canopy level and the community level. And okay, make sure you can see the slides. So at the canopy level, if your city has an inventory, or you can talk with your city forester, what does the historical tree canopy look like compared to today? What does the tree species diversity look like? What does the size diversity look like? What access to public green spaces are there? What programs do you have in your community? And where are the gaps in your programming? What needs more attention? Do you have super mature trees and you need to plant and you need to maintain those and plant new trees? Do you have a lack of public spaces in areas with low income that they could use access to parks? Like where in your community can you do good, and where do the trees need help, and how do they need help? That's kind of what you're looking at there. And then at the community, perspective and structure, it's important to understand the context of where the community is coming from. So what is the historical relationship of your community to the local government? What are the current problems and struggles of people in the community? What's the attitude of your community towards trees? What's the attitude of the local government towards trees? Those are two different things. What's the relationship of, Paula asked me to put this in, relationship of local non-governmental urban forestry organizations, basically nonprofits and non-government agencies that are doing urban forestry work. What is the relationship of those people and those organizations to your community? What's the size of your community, and what are existing organizations and structures that you can lean on? Which are a lot of questions to ask, I know. But if you can answer just a few, you can then narrow down to possible avenues of urban forest advocacy in your community. So on the civic engagement side, we have attend a public meeting, talk to your neighbors about cost and benefits of trees, contact or join your local tree board, email or call your elected officials, or potentially write to the Indiana Community Forestry Council if you feel so inclined and you have a broader issue that you feel like needs to be raised to kind of like a state level attention. For education, and I also added outreach if you know how to do tree ID, you can lead a tree walk. If you can identify, I don't know, the trees in your local park, not even all the trees in Indiana, just the trees in your local park, you can lead a tree walk, and you can help connect people to nature, which in turn helps connect people to their community and trees, and why like connect those two together. Like, oh, my quality of life is related to the things in the trees in my community. Sharing resources for choosing the right tree in the right place, I think, is really big, because people are gonna do what they want on their landscape, and the more that they have access to tools to choose the right trees, and just understanding that there needs to be some thought that's put into any thought at all, I think it is, a good place to start. This is a big one, utilizing existing community events. So, we're talking about there's problems with applying grants because we don't have capacity. Well, you can help offload your capacity if you utilize existing community events. And every single community I've talked to, when I've said this, I'm like, I'm sure there's this event that happens every year that you could table at as a tree board. And they're like, oh yeah, this one. I'm like, yeah, you don't have to plan your own event. Just the community is already connected. They already know about this event, that they're familiar with it. You can just have a presence there, and it'll make all the difference, and you won't have to go out of your way of planning your own event and try and get people to come to this new thing that they're not familiar with. Write a letter to the editor in your local paper. So, any way you can get involved with media in a positive way, especially if you're planting trees, I feel like is a good thing. Share about trees on social media. Social media is a big one these days. DNR has a Division of Forestry account, and I wish we weren't so limited on what we could put on there. But if you want, effective, funny posts, Michigan DNR Community Urban Forestry has some great funny posts. And I just feel like anytime you can make people laugh and teach about trees, you're gonna have them more engaged. So I feel like that's the role of social media, is to get a laugh out of people. And then in terms of tree care, because that's really where the service provision comes in, find or join or create a local neighborhood tree care group. It doesn't have to be super formal. There's people that are just say, hey, I care about the trees in my neighborhood. You have a little bit of time, I have a little bit of time, let's just go mulch these trees, or let's go, water or whatever. So I've known several, especially for the larger cities where there's not really capacity all the time for caring for every single tree. The neighborhood groups really play a big part. Consider planting a tree in your yard, if you haven't already. I'm sure most people have. But, and this is advocacy for you guys, and you can bring these ideas then to your tree boards and your other people that maybe haven't thought, oh yeah, I could use a tree in my yard. I don't know. And of course, seeking out local volunteer opportunities with local parks or forestry or nonprofits or what have you, and becoming a tree steward as well. How many tree stewards do we have? Do we have some? We have a few. Okay, so these are some examples, but first what I'm gonna do before we get into sort of a mini discussion, I just want to offer resources and connect you to DNR in your advocacy. So in terms of education, we really are focused on the two that I mentioned, tree steward workshops and our 5th grade Arbor Day poster contest. So any way that you can take advantage and try and get some engagement in your local schools with 5th grade Arbor Day poster contest, and or tree stewards, I was telling people, if you have a bunch of, so we usually have about 30 people that come to tree stewards each time. So if you have like 20 to 30 people that are like, yeah, I want to go learn about trees, and you have a good venue, come see me. And more than likely, if you have capacity to help me plant, then I'm gonna want to do it. It's just a matter of, making it happen. And then we've also started, I think we've done 2 successful invasive species exchanges, and these are just focused on trees. Basically, it's we partner with a community group, and they people send in pictures of a calorie pear and or other invasive tree that, like a picture that proof it was there, and then that they've removed it. And so the people that are taking part in this exchange have to actually remove it themselves, which is the hard part. But we provide a free native tree. And so this is not necessarily to get like as many, it's not for scale of removing invasives. It really is education about invasive, the problems with invasive trees. And I know for a fact that our social media posts, like on Facebook Forestry, the ones that have blown up the most have been about invasive exchanges. And people are like, well, my calorie pear isn't invasive. And it's like, well, yes, it is, but it started the conversation just by having that. So if you're interested in that, I think we are accepting new partners. I don't know what our capacity is for hosting a bunch of them. And then we do plan next year to have some Tree City forums. So anytime you're trying to bring along people, like anyone who's in a Tree City is invited to this, or Tree Campus or Healthcare, Tree Campus K through 12. But if you want to get people more connected or like involved in your community, if you have that person that's like kind of on the edge, you can invite them to a forum, and then maybe they'll be more ready to spend their time on trees. Of course, this symposium is a big thing that, I put together to try and connect people, and hopefully you've gotten some good networking out of the past 2 days. I know I have. And then we're here to offer support. And I don't know if everyone really knows that for real. Like, we're not just saying that, like, if you contact us, we will help you with what projects you have within the scope of our capacity. But I don't want anyone to feel like they're drowning and they don't know what they're doing. Like, we are here to help you. And so, of course, we have the annual grants, but, special projects, we can help with logistics, we can help with whatever. And then, just writing resources. We're going to continue to publish things to help with outreach and kind of getting the tree knowledge out and about. So that's kind of DNR's role in the advocacy, in your guys' advocacy that you're doing in your communities. And I have another resource document. So I have 3, and I'm going to share all 3 of them with you via email as well. But this one is specifically focused on advocacy, so connecting people to all the different organizations that are doing work in their community, at the federal, regional, and local level. Kind of the role of Tree City USA. I know we had a great talk by Eric. And then tools to learn about how to advocate and about tree care. So I'm hoping that between these 3, resource documents, you have connections about nurseries, you have resources about advocacy and funding. And if you need any other resource documents, please do contact me, and I'll make up another one. Okay. So now I need to get my questions, but I kind of wanted to have just a little bit of time to, hopefully I got your brains thinking about maybe some things, some ideas, and I want to have a discussion just about, what your ideas are, what success you've had in different ways that you've advocated in the past. And so I have some questions. Don't worry. I'll be right. Let me get up real quick. So, for our discussion questions, let's start up with What form of advocacy seems like your strong suit or like something that you want to do? So let me go back to the advocacy. Okay. So, and maybe you're on a tree board, so what forms of advocacy are you already doing? By raise a hand. Who's on a tree board or doing some kind of civic, action in their community? Okay, all right. What about service provision? Who's actively providing trees, doing tree work in their community? Yeah, look at all you. Okay. Who is actively organizing events in their communities? Yeah. Who's actively teaching people in their communities? See, you guys are already advocates, so that is awesome. Okay. So let's do, what ideas do you have for potential urban forestry programs in your communities? What new ideas do you have for advocating in your community? Rachel's got one.
We are starting to call where I live in Newport, we're trying to get in the habit of calling our tree planting events public health initiatives.
Yeah, so Rachel says she is calling her tree planting events public health initiatives. That's very good. Rebrand. I like it. What other ideas do we have? No one else has any other ideas? Okay, what are we actively doing right now? You got one, Kevin? Oh, a flyer on the water bill to opt in for a tree. I like that. That's a good idea. Most people look at their water bills, I hope. Got one in the back? Memorial tree plantings. Yep, that's a big one. And then Laura has said that in Richmond they're going to do a memorial grove and care for a grove of trees. And I like that idea because then you're managing the landscape more than like an individual tree at each time, if that makes sense. All right. No other ideas. You guys are tired from lunch. Let me see. Do I have any other discussion questions? Oh, engaging the local homeschool community. Yeah, I know you have Carrie at Crown Hill does a big event each year with the homeschool crowd. And so if you are interested in that, potentially she would have experience or logistics of that kind of a thing and how to get in contact with the homeschool community. Do you have another one, Rachel?
It's something we want to do this year. I don't know if we'll do it, Sandy's talking about it, but having a tree climbing event for kids. And we have a crew of women climbers at one of the companies. And so we want to get kids seeing that this is an industry that they can work in.
Yeah.
We're like halfway there. I don't know.
Yeah, actually, there's someone in Fort Wayne, a climber in Fort Wayne that did a community event I went to, and it's.
Oh, yeah. Personality issue? No, it's just the same people. Like, you got it.
Oh, you're talking about the championship, the climbing competition?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're talking about at schools.
There is a bug on me. Delete that out of the recording. Don't mind me. Okay. Yeah, there was somebody in Fort Wayne that did that. They're a climber and they wanted to have a community climbing event, and I think probably like it was a business, an arborist business, and they had an HR person, and I think she was connected to a lot of. So I think it really does take for community organizing. You need the person that knows everybody so that they can invite everybody. And I think that was the key for theirs, because Anthony had the technical expertise of the climbing, but to actually get people to show up, you need that piece as well. So.
And you need so many people funneling into the industry.
Yeah.
Tree
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So exposure to green jobs. I like it. All right. Anything else before we have closing remarks? One last one, Jim.
Working with high schools.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, he said working with the local high schoolers, and I would suggest, because it's hard to get in contact with all of them, I've been working a lot with junior achievement, and they have a central region, an Indiana region junior achievement, and then they have Southeast Indiana and Kentuckiana, and then they have like a northeastern one, I want to say. And so they actually are the ones that put on career fairs. And most of them have like a really big event where it's like tons and tons of kids. But then the Central Indiana one, they organize career fairs based off the school. So they have capacity to do that. And I go to those and I see almost no natural resource people there. So if you live in Central Indiana and you want to get more engaged with the young folk, that sounded, I don't know, with the young crowd, then utilizing people that are already doing the events and going to them and representing natural resources. You had something, Carrie, or no? Okay.
We did Arbor Day at an elementary school and then 3 other schools.
Okay, so and I remember you were asking for stuff for that. So you did it. So you can do it at the school level, and if you have capacity, did they approach you or did you approach them?
My son was a student at that school specifically, but we asked if we could have a tree climber there
Oh.
to talk about careers in our rural culture.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we had a broader representation of the attractions.
Right.
That's what made us the station we wanted to do.
Right. Yeah, that's the thing about career fairs. If you want to get into the nitty gritty about how to get kids to come to yours, I have some knowledge after many failed attempts. So we have 2 questions, so I'll go to Laura first, or ideas.
Well, as a municipality, something that we've been having to do or have the ability to do this year that is different is advocating for ourselves when it comes to utility contractors and being this at the table for some of those early conversations when it comes to, it's resulted in us being able to save some trees and also make sure that they're meeting our retaining requirements, but it's never really happened before, but now at the permitting level, we're getting involved with the utility company.
Wow. Yeah.
I think will make a big difference moving forward.
Yeah, that's awesome. So working with them and even just getting an invite to the table to be able to be in that planning process, that's really awesome. In the back?
So I was just going to kind of piggyback on Carrie's comment about the career day. So my partner, but asked me to join her there at that career day to give the kids a lot of together. And so that event was held in the gymnasium, and they allowed me to set a retrieval canvas saver up to hers, and I gave everyone a full-on, 50% demo for every group of kids in one market. So that was a live demo.
Yeah, that is awesome. Yeah. I know for a fact there's going to be kids that remember that for a long time after that experience. So, yeah, if you're a climber, get to those career fairs. I think that's the takeaway. Okay, any last? Okay, well, we have reached the conclusion of this event. Thank you guys so much for coming. I hope you guys. Yes. Yes, yeah. So I want to say, first of all, thank you to Jacob in the blue in the back, who's been really helping me a lot. Thank you to Haskell and his team, who have been an awesome partner, and also Laura and Kyle, who's not here, and Lori and Carrie, who are all on our Education and Events Committee and really helped do this whole thing. So I would really love to see most everyone stay for the INCFC meeting, because what they are doing is relevant to everybody, and they really need like geographical representation. They need diverse representation in multiple ways, and they're still looking for members. And you don't have to be the most best tree expert to be on it. You just have to care about trees in Indiana, which I think most of you do. So yeah, I'm gonna let you go, but please do stay for the event and get some drinks and food on your way out.